Good afternoon to St. Lucia, for our nationals both here and abroad. We are here in downtown Castries, the St. Lucia House of Assembly, and we are here as we begin debates on the Appropriation Bill 2021-2022. I am Lucia Joseph alongside Primus Hutchinson. Last we were here, Primus, the Prime Minister Honorable Alan Chastney had delivered the appropriation bill, and that would have been Tuesday evening, last evening. And of course, they presented the budget in the sum of $1.639 billion. And in that budget, Primus, the Prime Minister really delved into the economic situation that is facing the country as a result of COVID-19. Certainly, he was able to lay out what the difficulties are in being able to continue meeting the needs of the country. But also, the Prime Minister was very optimistic, filled with hope, very inspiring indeed, Primus. The Prime Minister, when he delivered the appropriation bill, indicating to St. Lucians that the power of we, and I thought that to be very profound, when he said that, collectively, St. Lucians can definitely rise to the challenge. He called on for that shared responsibility in order for us to be able to shoulder the burden that is confronting the country at this time. And Primus, while the Prime Minister did speak to all of those difficulties, in the budget, he's been able to also outline plans for various sectors in the St. Lucian economy, and plans for recovery, as well as plans that will be able to directly benefit the people of St. Lucia and the businesses as well. And Primus, when we left here last, you didn't get a chance for you to diaqueol. So I don't want to monopolize the time that we have before the sitting begins. Let me allow you now to diaqueol. Oui. Okay. Bonjour. Bon après-midi. All right.
Get in there. Bon après-midi. Bon après-midi, messieurs, mesdames, comme on était dit, hier, nos partenaires cherchent pour ça expliquer complètement cohérent sur présentation Premier ministre, c'est honorable Alan Chastney, il est venu pour deuxième présentation budget $1,6 billion et check dollars pour dépenser en pays. Premier ministre là mettait un pile pèse importance sur ça parce qu'il en bas tout tracassement, maladie corona et tout ça qui était pour faire pour une pièce activité à affaires touristes, et que ça c'est secteur touristique qui tient le pays à vivre. Alors en l'eau bagaille pour changer parce que le secteur agricole souffre et toutes les autres bagailles descendent. Alors le Premier ministre là et les membres du gouvernement tiennent pour venir ensemble avec le secteur manufacture et les autres pour ça exciter l'économie d'une façon et côté le tenir pour aider pour encourager les cultivateurs, les farmers pour produire et pour vendre les hôtels qui étaient en opération avec les autres. Premier ministre a dit aussi à part en bas tout cassement maladie corona. Comment va être fait mon jeune plusieurs assistances à changer ensemble $1,600 pour t'aider dans les autres diverses façons mon jeune assistance pour t'aider en situation économique et pour aider soulager situation à la vie en bas pèse corona aussi une éducation là diverses bagailles en place malgré l'école tenue pour fermée les sont faites en caille la tenue c'était arrangement en place pour qui maman continuer les soins et pour faire relativement plus aisé encore yo já établi diverses façons par internet pour aider à lever pousser renforcer l'éducation les soins éducation maman en pays et Premier là continuer pour parler sur diverses affaires domestiques en pays avec ça que j'ai fait malgré affaires touristes descendent par 54% en l'année avant mais tout ça pas apprécier la voix bien qu'on dit avec le niveau mettre divers bails en place pour voir qui nous a fait ça la venir secteur construction malgré ça a affecté autant mais le gouvernement pour mettre certains arrangements en place il est passé mettre en place 200 millions de dollars pour ça exciter l'économie dans divers projets avec secteur construction activité pour l'année à Magui, ça a été supposé, mais je crois qu'il s'est développé en année ça par 9,9%. Avec le secteur agricole là aussi, comme on dit tout à l'heure là. Alors, ça, un peu de bagaille, un peu de mangement qu'a fait, un peu de force, un peu de affaires qu'a mis en place pour ça aider économie pays avec budget ça là comme on dit c'est un côté gouvernement j'ai mis divers arrangements en place pour ça adresser divers secteurs particulièrement comme le aspect secteur touristique là qui vient opération encore tout de suite connaissant le aspect premier bateau touriste là pour visiter cette ici en mi-temps mois de juillet et le aspect qui plus tard en l'année à la une plus d'activité encore à la fête touristique. Un autre bagage qui comme cela met en pile confiance à ça c'est d'affaire la vaccine qui a commencé en celui-ci et que la vaccine comme pays a commencé même plus la vaccine quand on veut plus la vaccine la seule manière pour abattre maladie corona et nous crois que ça a réussi à la façon pour pas directement effacer la corona entièrement, mais petit à petit, ça a fait et ça a aidé plus de monde pour ça entrer en affaires business au pays. Ça a aussi encouragé plus d'agences et business au pays pour ça venir à cette liste établir business et comme on dit, l'industrie touristique là qui est venue encore plus vivant en pays. Et ça c'est une direction qui est le Premier ministre et puis budget ça là pour l'année 2021-2022.
Certainly, Prime Minister, and I heard you this speak to the tourism, and yes, that is the lifeblood sector, meaning that it is the sector that really injects a lot of activity into the other sectors. I always like to say that the tentacles of tourism is very wide-ranging, and I believe that given the corona impact that we're experiencing, one can now really understand that tourism is beyond just the simple hotel plant. Oftentimes you just think of it as that, the sea and sand and sun and then people at a hotel, but we're now come to really appreciate that tourism really is intertwined with every single economic activity in the country.
Listen, without cutting you short, there is a step. I cannot recall verbatim, but the PM did make a statement regarding leadership. He said, in the midst of crisis, leadership plays a pivotal role.
Absolutely.
What's to that effect?
Absolutely.
And that was quite a statement quite a pronouncement by the PM as far as the leadership of this country and the direction that he would love to see this country go.
Well, the leadership of Prime Minister, and you being a husband and a father of many, you would understand that, and I just want to reduce it to the household level, that in order for you to be able to keep that home functioning and having the children to be obedient and successful and in the academic endeavors and you're just making them well-run, productive citizens, it is important for you as the head of the house to be able to understand your role, to stand firm when you need to to be stern when you need to be stern in order to keep everything in line. But most importantly, Primus, as as the head of a country, as the head of a household, you must make those tough decisions. And it can be a very lonely place indeed, because sometimes you are making decisions based upon information that other individuals are not privy to, they do not have at their disposal. And so those decisions must always go up against the opinion of others.
Oftentimes doesn't make you very popular.
Absolutely. And so you must be able to learn how to stand tough.
It's interesting that you brought up the point about managing from the home. I mean, as you actually touched a very simple, quite an interesting part of me, having had to embrace 8 children when I had 5 of my own. Very poignant time at Lucia when my first stepdaughter passed suddenly, and then we had to embrace
take in the children
under very challenging times economically.
And so you would understand how you must be able to manage, mitigate, how you will have to be able to perhaps cut from there in order to make the other side work. And I think that is what St. Lucia has been undergoing in the last year, really being able to manage those finances. My grandmother used to say multiplier. Am I saying it correct? Is that what it is? Okay, I remember that. So to multiplier and really be able to manage that. But Primus, we spoke about tourism, and I'm saying that the tentacles of tourism so far reaching, and one sector that definitely benefits from tourism, and again perhaps we didn't understand to what magnitude, but the agriculture sector, because we had of our farmers, our fishers, our livestock, the butchers and so forth, really selling to the hotels, which really was a large clientele for our agriculture sector. And so the Prime Minister did indicate in the budget address the establishment of a livestock station at Volet in Miku, and that livestock station is nearly complete. And it's saying here that there's a diagnostic facility at Union that is operational, and that they've completed the construction of a ripening facility as well at the Inland Reception Depot there, the IRD in Lakai Dennery, and that will control the specific environmental conditions for ripening there of the bananas.
The 7-crop program as well.
The 7-crop program as well is beginning to pick up steam, great steam for us, because we just spend too much really in importing foods. And so the idea of the 7-crop program is to grow what we eat, but most importantly, these are foods that are really sort of indigenous, to St. Lucia. We have it here, and yet we're importing so much of it. And so the idea now is to ramp up the production of these foods, and these cash crops are really going to also encourage more people into farming, because you can really have that turnover quickly. So we are having the expansion of the food crop production program, and that is for the lettuce, cabbage, tomato. We have the sweet peppers, the watermelons, very popular, and yes, cantaloupe and pineapple. So these are very popular foods here, very nutritious, very nutritious. And so Primus, the expansion of that program is going to serve us in good stead. But we also have the banana productivity improvement program, Primus, which is bananas, very soft spot for bananas, the St. Lucia population. And it is the crop that really St. Lucia was built on. You would have more of a knowledge of that than I would.
Yes, I actually worked in that sector for quite a while, with the Ministry of Agriculture and Windburn, when banana was considered the green gold. And I can recall the former PM Sir John advising, strongly suggesting to farmers that they should really take in the agricultural sector seriously and to manage the whole the banana production, and I think it was quite easy for them. It was easy money. I mean, they had a ready market, in Europe, and so they didn't think of it as one that would have produced challenges in due course, and that's exactly what occurred. The banana production since then has gone down considerably, and I'm not sure how we can manage it to a level where close to where it had,
to where it used to be
where it was at one time.
Now, interestingly, you say that, farmers, and I'm just going through to be able to find my notes on that, because we are there, lots of paper before us, but you're speaking about the sort of decline of the banana industry, but under the banana productivity improvement program, farmers, we've been able to see life being injected again into the industry.
I am aware that perhaps a lot more people are beginning to go back into banana production.
Yes, people. There is a glimmer of hope there, and we really want it to come back to shine. Perhaps not as brightly as what the green gold days were, but there are new markets that we can possibly explore, as well as agro-processing that we perhaps didn't want to know about that. Absolutely.
Within the OECS itself,
that we can be able to begin to export to.
But regional trade.
Yes. So under the Banana Productivity Program, Primus, again to what you were saying, there is an expansion of the acreage for cultivation that has taken place. Pest and disease control, we know that it's something that plagues the industry dearly, and so that program has made such strides in being able to assist the farmers in keeping pests and disease at bay. We've also seen the increased productivity of the banana farms, to your point as well, that many people are returning. And then we're seeing the sustainable finance mechanisms for the inputs. That's another thing that the farmers are always concerned about. So just a further little statistic there for you. The total acreage for under banana cultivation, we said that it has increased. It has increased by 39.3%. And the number of farms producing bananas also rose, again, Primus, to your point. So we used to have 286 farms. Now we are at 765 farms.
Wow.
And as a result of the project, productivity is defined as yield per acreage, which has increased from 8 to 10 tons. So I'm telling you, Primus, while yes, there are the issues on the ground, and sometimes we who are not directly involved in certain sectors, but certainly we glean our perceptions from the news and so forth. Then we shape our own understanding of what is. So this information certainly tells us that there is life, there is activity in the banana sector. Yes. Promise, but go ahead.
Quand moi Christophe a dit, monsieur madame, nous avons parlé particulièrement en production figue. Nous savons que figue j'ai trouvé une situation qui est comme on dit ça, moi ministre agricole trade, honorable Ezekiel Joseph. La situation production figue ça a affecté cette décision pile c'est l'année qui passée. Nous savons que c'est 1970 là. Juste presque en 1980, figue c'était fait grand succès. C'est que l'eau cultivateurs, les femmes ont fait très bien en ça. Il était ça indiqué sur l'école, mais la situation a changé après ça. Et puis l'autre institution, compagnie, gouvernement est forcé. Situation pour trouver que mais comme le dit tout à l'heure, le gouvernement a mis un programme agricole en place pour adresser tout ça et côté pour qui dans la situation protection grâce à via sous pied encore et quand les soldats là à présent l'année plus que 700 monde qui engagé les femmes à cultivateurs qui engagé en production aussi là il y a l'autre programme en 7 dans oui côté fruitage avec le régime qui nous a produit en cette aussi même nous avons dépensé millions de dollars pour mener ces bails à l'avenir en cette aussi nous gouvernement décidé c'est trop l'argent qui a gaspillé et qui a encouragé les cultivateurs et les femmes pour produire ces denrées là. Ici, cette l'année banana, l'année cantaloupe, l'année tomates, l'année différents choix pommes, les tea, les autres qui nous a produit cette aussi même et que ça comme Amérique qui citoyen économie encore plus meilleure pour bailler les cultivateurs mais la vie économique cette aussi la vie pour production agricole production 7 de ça la comme dit 7 crops et production figue pour nous garder si nous bagaille ça marcher même si la vie green gold currently mais il arrive après il s'arrive pour ça
et qu'il fait la vie.
Oui.
But still with agriculture primers, the Prime Minister also did indicate that in January this year, the factory space in Dennery was officially handed over to Caribbean Quality Meats, and it's the poultry processing plant on operation, and it is anticipated that it will be operational at that location there in January by July of this year. So again, more movement happening there in the agriculture sector.
Ce qu'on peut faire, nous devons faire les cultivateurs pour institution avec établissement volette côté boucher plus production viande et monde qui ça vend des animaux en place là en place qui bien avancé et ça va mettre un bon soulagement pour les bouchers et l'autre monde qui produit des animaux qui ça c'est un développement neuf pour pousser devant avec là
qui a fait là oui on the renewable energies primers because that fossil fuels the world has been striving to be able to rely less on fossil fuels. Here in St. Lucia, we've had a number of achievements in that regard, and the Prime Minister in the budget address did indicate that the process is continuing for that, and we're looking to really be able to roll out clean renewable energy. And in that line, the reported that Lucia had secured the resources from Abu Dhabi, the Abu Dhabi Fund for Development, for the installation of a 10 megawatt AC solar farm with a 7 megawatt battery storage, and that's happening in the Chumase area. Over the last year or so, we've been hearing about that activity taking place there in Chumase. And for this financial year, the Prime Minister also indicated that there's an allocation for the installation of at least 100 kilowatt of solar PV systems at 10 schools around the island, Primus, and that is huge because, within the public sector, lots of energy is consumed, and at our schools as well, and so it's good that we'll be able to give our schools that additional safety range, because we do know that for climate change, when we are experiencing those fierce storms and so forth, it is important for us to be able to have alternative sources of energy. Yes, very, very, very important for that. We also have an LED lights program that's taking place, and most importantly, there's an energy efficiency promotion effort being undertaken, and the Prime Minister indicated that there will be an audit of some 40 schools, and they will be retrofitting for lights for over 6,700 fluorescent lights as well taking place at the schools. The street lighting is going to, what we see now, there will be a replacement with LED lights. So we are looking to be able to bring down the consumption bill for the public sector, and so having to put in all of these efficiency light primers would serve us in good stead.
Oui, monsieur madame, Colisado, gouvernement a essayé pour garder comme il peut pour ça baisser la qualité force nous a servi qualité courant nous a servi pour faire certains travail. Ça a mis un gros pèse dans le pays. Alors il a servi façon qui plus facile, qui ça plus réglé, soulager la situation. Manière nous a servi courant. Alors nous a servi courant par force vent, nous a servi par force de l'eau. Et à danser les lumières qui nous a servi quand c'est light là, nous a replacer et puis ça nous qui LED, ça a fait qu'il y ait moins courant et que ça a un soulagement pour tout le monde parce que ça a réduit un pile à ce quantité force courant et plus force courant c'est plus l'argent dépensé. Alors ça c'est un bon soulagement à ce programme pour ça régler et balancer la situation économique c'est possible.
You know, farmers, I think that's what we are experiencing when St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We all throughout the Caribbean are feeling the effects. And in fact, farmers, just this morning I was reading that the weather agency over in Spain had already reported that you have a cloud of ash and gases moving towards Spain. So they were expecting that resulting from the eruption in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, making its way across the ocean there. And why they do not expect to have any severe ashfall, but certainly they've put the region over there in Spain on alert that cloud of ash and gas will be penetrating the air space, if you will. Yes, so we can see the resulting effects. And all of these things really form part of, the climate change. And when we speak about climate change, it's not just about warmer waters, it's not just about the hurricanes, fiercer storms, unusual weather patterns, but that too, when we look at disasters on a whole, we are in a very volcanic region, and so all of that forms part of all the reasons why farmers building resilience is so important for us. And I think that when we talk about resilience, it will no longer be this abstract concept that we believe that only perhaps specialists speak about, but because we are going through, we now in this generation that we are all experiencing what it is for ourselves, we're now being able to grasp the concepts on a more personal and individual level. And so I'm hoping that because of that, we all now can take that individual responsibility and make it a collective effort for us to be able to ensure that we are a resilient nation.
I wonder if we have any choice in the matter. Because of the challenges that we're facing, we
have no choice.
We have to be resilient.
It's do or die.
You can't live back. It's do or die. So you've been pushed and forced into a situation that will work to your benefits eventually. And that's exactly what it is. The situation of the ash and the volcanic activity in the La Soufrière volcano in St. Vincent is beginning to impact here seriously because of the ash, and WASCO has been calling on the public to conserve water because you never know what they
In
may
terms of they have to
some-
fix the water
right,
supply.
and we've been experiencing
Absolutely.
quite a bit of ash lately as a result of the volcanic activity.
Well, speaking about activity, we've seen that the chamber has completely filled Primus, and that's an indication that the Speaker of the House, Honorable Andy Daniel, will be making his entrance anytime from now. And once he does, we will be seeing the commencement of this afternoon's session, day 2 in the for the appropriation bill for 2021-2022, and it will be the first day of debate on the appropriations bill, the bill having been presented last evening by Prime Minister Honorable Alan Chasney. Coming off the first on that list will be the Leader of the Opposition, Honorable Philip J. Pierre, and member for Castries East. He will be delivering his response to the appropriation bill or the budget address. So he will be able to kick things off there for us this afternoon. I do promise before you take over, just to end on what we were talking about, the resilience aspect. In the sector for agriculture, lots of work, and it's one of the sectors that's very vulnerable in times of disaster. And so there'll be a disbursement of $6.1 million in this financial year from the CDB for the building of resilience in the agriculture sector for adaptation to climate change and climate variability. So that, Primus, is very good news for the agriculture sector.
Yeah, of course. Oui, comme ça, nous avons préparé tout à l'heure parce que la majorité, c'est le même parlement un candidat et que ça c'est un mot transcrit le débat quand il a commencé quand il a chicané il y a comme la situation à Lucia et quand il ça qui est premier qui a commencé c'est chef opposition honorable Philippe Dupier qui a présenté réponse pour présentation Premier ministre l'a fait hier qui a consulte alors c'est lui premier qui a commencé présentation aujourd'hui pour by réponse pour Premier ministre honorable Alan Chasney avec some speaker qui va venir mon cas dans des tasks qui
making his way up the staircase
conduit mais cela pour voilà petit moment et qu'il fait avancer et que session rapport so the Sergeant of Arms has made her entrance followed by the Speaker of the House Honorable Andy Daniel, and the session for today will commence.
Let us pray.
In one life or at the world at large. It is important that our hope is directed towards God, as only godly hope transforms our lives for eternity. The Bible says in 2 Thessalonians 2:16-17, now may our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ himself and God our Father, who has loved us and has given us eternal comfort, good hope by grace, comfort and strengthen your hearts in every good work and in every good word. Let us pray. Almighty God, by whom alone King reigns and princes decree justice, and from whom alone cometh all counsel, all wisdom, and all understanding, we thine unworthy servants are gathered again today in your name, and we do humbly beseech thee to send down thy heavenly wisdom from above to direct us and guide us in all our consultations. And grant that we have in thy fear always before our eyes, and lay aside all private interests, all prejudices, and partial affections. The result of our counsels may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion, justice, and safety, honor and happiness of the Queen, the public weal, peace and tranquility of St. Lucia, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. The grace of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us now and forevermore. Amen.
Honorable members, I have received words from the member for Dennery South. He won't be with us today, as well as the member for Miko North, the member for Castries North is running late. Honorable members, I beg to remind the honorable members that when the House rose, the question was that the appropriation 2021-2022 bill be read a second time. Prime Minister.
Speaker, I beg to move for the suspension of Standing Order 32-9 to enable the honorable member from Castries East to get an extended period of 3 hours.
Honorable.
Mr. Speaker, I would take that at another time.
I did not.
I thank the Prime Minister, and I will be accepting that privilege later in the debate. I will not be speaking now.
We were under the impression that you were going to start that. Member for Dennery North. You. Yeah.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is with much humility and honor that I have accepted the responsibility to lead the opposition charge in response to the debate on the appropriation bill, otherwise or more commonly known to the average St. Lucian as the budget statement or the budget address. Mr. Speaker, as I rose from my chair and moved to the lectern or podium, I was once again reminded that my presence in this august assembly of lawmakers for the past 10 years has been at the behest of the people of Dennery North. For the past 10 years, Mr. Speaker, they have been the proverbial wind beneath my political and parliamentary wings. Soon enough from today, our country will go through a general election. I'm happy to report, Mr. Speaker, that I've gotten a commitment from the people of Dennery North that a third term beckons, and that when the votes are counted and results declared, their expressions of joy, hope, satisfaction at the results will very succinctly be encapsulated and expressed by the simple, unambiguous tagline, "Shone again." And so, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the people of Olio, Lapel, Richford, Despin, Gadet, Grand Riviere, Belmont, Larissus, Grand Riviere, and Denny Riviere, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank them for having reposed their confidence in my ability to give expression to their concerns and their plight. Mr. Speaker, I want to express, with your indulgence, get well wishes to Gilroy, TJ, and Elias in my constituency. I also want to profit the opportunity, with your indulgence and that of colleagues in the House, to express condolences to Jane of Gadet and her family. She lost her son, Mr. Speaker, in an incident involving the police. And I know it's a very difficult and painful experience when a parent has to bury a child. Permit me, lastly, Mr. Speaker, with your indulgence, to express condolences to former Senator Joachim Henry and his family. And we all know that a few days ago, he lost his son suddenly in the United States of America. Mr. Speaker, last night we were treated to an exercise by the Prime Minister, one we have grown accustomed to, the presentation of the appropriation bill, or what we call the budget address. The display by the Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, to use a cricket analogy, was a very unattractive innings, one that reminded me of the playing days of the member for Ancillary, where he had great difficulty getting the ball off the square. And at times, Mr. Speaker, not only did he struggle to time the ball and to get it off the square, at the end of every single over, he needed a water break. As if to suggest, Mr. Speaker, that what he was doing or what he was engaged in was so arduous and was so difficult. The presentation by the Prime Minister last night, Mr. Speaker, was flat. It lacked creativity. It failed to inspire the masses. And worse, Mr. Speaker, not a single sector in the St. Lucian society was able to draw or derive any confidence or inspiration from the utterances of the Prime Minister last night. If any, Mr. Speaker, perhaps, maybe, the hoteliers would have heard the Prime Minister suggest or hint to us that there will be increased airlift in the country next year. Mr. Speaker, a response could have been formulated or fashioned long before the Prime Minister took to the podium. We almost knew beforehand what he was coming with and what he was about to say. Same old, same old, same old. Warm up from the refrigerator, which will better resonate in Creole if I were to say another serving of découché. Mr. Speaker, he said he was going to create a modern healthcare system. We'd heard that before. He said that as a country we would be less dependent on fossil fuels. We heard that before. He said he was going to boost agriculture. And Mr. Speaker, he said that there would be the construction of hotels. But this time he was more careful. He did not promise the quantum that he would have promised previously. Mr. Speaker, after hearing the Prime Minister last night, should the banana farmers of this country be inspired? Did the utterances of the Prime Minister last night engender any kind of confidence in bus drivers, the nurses at the OKEU, the fisher folk, single mothers? Whom did he inspire with that budget address last night, Mr. Speaker? But I knew it was going to come to that, because this administration has wasted time, wasted 5 years, Mr. Speaker. And on the eve of elections, they have absolutely nothing to show after 5 years. 5 wasted years characterized by misguided priorities. And on the eve of election, Mr. Speaker, there is a scramble. There is a mad rush to complete projects. This will not work, Mr. Speaker. Failed promises. Where is the new St. Jude? Where are the bananas to France? Where are all the new hotels that we've been promised over a 5-year period? And where is the ching-ching in the pockets of St. Lucians, Mr. Speaker? Where is the new St. Lucia we were promised? Businesses are closing, and I know the easy retort is COVID. Crime is spiraling out of control. It will be difficult to attribute that to COVID. Mr. Speaker, the expectations of the average St. Lucian has been violated by this government. Last night, we heard the Prime Minister in his budget address speak about the Malawi. Malawi is a reality, whether we like it or not. And over time, Mr. Speaker, the meanings of words can change. Semantics can change over time because language is dynamic. Somebody who would have been referred to as a Malawi in the 1970s, and if you were to use that same label in 2021, you are not necessarily referring to the same class of individual. Malawi is a reality. Malawi is more of a social construct than we are prepared to appreciate. It basically speaks to where you are on that social pyramid. Like you said, Mr. Speaker, nous sommes Premier Ministre a parlé about il mentionné Malawi. Et Malawi par défaut, comme on te croit en tant que passé, les yo qui au Malawi, ou yo dit moun c'est Malawi actuellement. Ça ka simplement dit nous, c'est ou c'est un monde qui pas obligé ni tout ça ou besoin la vie. Mais nous pas pour regarder ça à cause de ça c'est un défaut qu'au monde pas ni ça. In every society, there are persons who refer to as the little man. And Mr. Speaker, you do not care about the Malawi. You only speak about the Malawi. When the United Workers' Party came in, they attacked the social programs. They blamed single mothers for some of the difficulties we faced in the country. Vendors have been tormented, and it really hurts my heart, Mr. Speaker, to see the police in wrestling matches on the streets of our city with vendors who are trying to earn a living. Mr. Speaker, if I were to refer to page 26 of the budget address, subheading private sector achievements, the Prime Minister alluded to the fact that there are hundreds of young St. Lucians employed at the call centers. But he only mentioned Ojo Labs and ITEL PBO. I did not hear Actel or KM2. I believe, Mr. Speaker, that employment created for young St. Lucians in the call center is something that all of us must support. I believe it is a good stopgap measure to deal with the chronic global problem of youth unemployment. Youth unemployment has been a crisis in this country and in the Caribbean for a long time. And if there are measures that the government will embark on to expand the employment program at those call centers, the St. Lucia Labour Party will support. We raised concerns about how Ojo Lab was set up, Mr. Speaker. We asked questions about the suite of concessions that they receive. But our argument and posture was never to deny young St. Lucians of employment opportunities.
Mr. Speaker, on a point of elucidation.
Honorable Member, are you giving?
I'm yielding, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does that mean that in support of the young people getting jobs, that if your party wins the election, you will not close down the call centers in Viewfort like Ojo Labs?
Honorable Member.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Mr. Speaker, my understanding of the word by way of definition, elucidation, means that you're providing clarity And I don't know that the member did that. Mr. Speaker, I will continue to say that, or repeat, that it is a good stopgap measure for the unemployment situation among young people. And the St. Lucia Labour Party will not be opposed. And I will go further to say, Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding we raise concerns about the suite of concessions that Ojolab received, a St. Lucia Labour Party, contrary to what is being bandied around and what young people are being made to believe, will not close down Ojolabs upon assuming office after the general elections. Mon lady, Mr. Speaker, that we got on a shy moon card is a that les parti Labour formé gouvernement après élection qui a venu, nous caille fermer Ojo Labs et puis l'autre call center qui est en pays. Mr. Speaker, moi je dire that les nous entrer un gouvernement, c'est pas des voix nous et nous avons pièce intention pour fermer pièce call center qui a employé jeunes moun en simplicité qui c'est call center ça en sud pays ou qui est en autre pays. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister on page 59 of the budget address, he mentioned the Dennery recording studio. And he told this Honorable House that the studio that was supposed to have been operational had been set back by COVID. And that his government is committed to completing that particular facility this financial year. Mr. Speaker, I was hoping to hear more with respect to that particular facility in the Dennery Basin. Mr. Speaker, the Dennery Basin is an area that is laced with a lot of creative talents. And any government or any agency of central government or even statutory corporation that embarks on establishing such a facility in the Dennery Basin, Mr. Speaker, will get the support of the member for Dennery North. Because I have an appreciation for what avenues given to young people to express their talents can yield, not just in terms of income for the families, but how it can ameliorate the living conditions within community. Mr. Speaker, I will turn to a pet subject of mine, which the Prime Minister spoke about on page 74 of the budget address. Bananas, fig. The most bewildering, the most confusing, and perhaps, Mr. Speaker, the statement that surprised me the most in the entire budget address of the Prime Minister was when he said, and I quote, "Our government remains committed to St. Lucia's banana industry." Mr. Speaker, qui a dit ça en créole? Moi, je suis tombé sorti en chaise, mais je suis Premier ministre l'a dit au souhait. That gouvernement flambeau ça là, c'est un gouvernement qui nie l'intérêt femme fig en priorité pour le gouvernement. Mr. Speaker, everything we have seen in the banana industry, from the time the United Workers' Party assumed office in 2016, has been inimical to the advancement of the industry and the well-being of the average banana farmer in this country. But that commitment he spoke about was not manifested in the presentation. One little paragraph and 4 bullet points. In the front speech, 8 pages, banana was mentioned once. And that is when His Excellency referenced the name of the industry charged with providing oversight for that particular industry. Gouvernement a fait nous croire that yo ni fig kon yo bagay qui c'est une priorité pour yo. Ek me ka di, Mr. Speaker. Tout bagay nous jawe depuis gouvernement venu en office en 2016 pour actuellement, c'est bagay qui compte développement pharma fig et puis industrie fig en pays cette ici. I did not see the pre-election enthusiasm when the Prime Minister and the Minister for Agriculture won the campaign trail. There was an enthusiasm that characterized their disposition when they spoke about the banana industry. And it wasn't general statements they were making, you know. They were very direct when they told the farmers of St. Lucia that they had plans at an advanced stage to export bananas to France. And Mr. Speaker, 5 years later, you cannot export a bunch of bananas to France. And when I asked him last year to level, through you, Mr. Speaker, with the farmers, level with the farmers, with the exception of the member for Castries South, every single one of us in here, we have held ministerial office. We know what it is like to make pronouncements as ministers. But sometimes programs do not come through. And sometimes due to no fault of ours. So if you had come and you had said to the farmers on the eve of elections that you had a market in France, level with the farmers and say, look, this was the intention, but for circumstances beyond our control, we are not able to carry through. But it is easy for you to sit there and see that as an attack. And this is not personal, Mr. Speaker. I live the experience of the average banana farmer. I see it before me every day. Furniture being repossessed. Utility bills cannot be met. And people who had already left the industry, they went back to cultivate. And the Prime Minister was correct when he said there was an increase in production. Yes, there was an increase in production. But production to where? And as a little boy, I remember those flat vans coming from Vieux-Fort. Let me say to your team, and Mr. Speaker, you can relate to that too because you live in the banana belt. Those flat vans used to leave Vieux-Fort to come into the Mabuya Valley. During the days of field packing, and the rejected fruit would stay right there on the ground, on the farm. And those farmers from Auger, Vieux-Fort, they would come with their pickups, collect the bananas to go and feed to their cattle and their pigs. That has returned. You know why, Mr. Speaker? Because we had the increased production, but no markets. And if I ask you, the member for Barbono, through you, Mr. Speaker, to level with the farmers and say, this was the intention, but it has not worked, you should not see that as being personal. We're talking about people's livelihoods here. Famate hakite. Yo vie planté fig, oui la tenir en chay production, et nous plus fig de taper produit. Mais là, il est venu pour ces figues ça taper vendre, Mr. Speaker, la patrie pièce market, et ces femmes ça tenir pour héter ces figues ça, et aujourd'hui, si nous venons ici, et qu'a dit ça en les behalf farmer, ça c'est un monde qui compte gouvernement, ça c'est un monde qui parle de programme gouvernement aller. Devant. You were the one who encouraged them to go back to the farms. You were the one in your yellow shirts. You had not assumed office as the government. You gave a guarantee. You were very concise with your pronouncement. Kofi Glahodia. And I saw farmers who bought into the campaign rhetoric, Mr. Speaker. I can never forget Lulu from Belmont with his pump. Lulu peut pomper un pump glow. Il prend un 4x4 qui est pas que les bols qui can make glow comme un drum pour user fig. Because if the production, because fig gala en France. Et que les figues ça pas pour vendre. Il passe avant un régime. Et que quand dit si moi venir ici à Rodia pour parler contre ça, ça c'est un monde qui compte gouvernement. Ça c'est un monde qui parle du gouvernement à devant. Auguste, Roman, Venos, Anselma, René, Selina, Pauli, Dylan, Lincoln, Boudou, Veno, Bailey, all those banana farmers, Mr. Speaker. There was a spring in their step going back to the farms, but their expectations have been violated. And we have seen nothing in the estimates or in the pronouncements by the Prime Minister to suggest that this government is making banana cultivation a priority in this country. There is still a very big role, an important role for the banana dollar in the economy of St. Lucia, and more so the rural economy, Mr. Speaker. When the banana revenue comes to the community, the little shops benefit. When the banana revenue comes into the community, children go to school with their supplies. What did we see in the 5 years? Under this government, we've witnessed the demise of Windfresh. In the last 10 years, the Minister for Agriculture, member for Babono, he's the only agriculture minister in this country to have sat on the board of Windfresh. This Minister of Agriculture is the only, Mr. Speaker. Mon parlement pour Babono, ek ministre qui a responsabilité pour agricole. C'est seul ministre agricole, en dernier 10 l'année en pays ça, qui a assis on le board Windfresh. Windfresh c'est entité et bien agency qui a responsabilité pour market fig. Et quand on dit Mr. Speaker, Windfresh fermé. Et qui a venu ici et puis gouvernement et dit nous il a travaillé dans l'intérêt femme Afrique. Et moi je dis Mr. Speaker, toute femme est content pour tant yoni market neuf pour fig. Nous tout qui ici comme on dit, comme ministre. L'année programme nous appoint un ministre nous dat nous voulons aller faire bail puis. Et de laisser pas faute ni pas fait. Et si moi viens avec moi dou 10 femmes pour apologie avec dit c'est des voix pour voir Afrique en France. Mais on des bagailles fait et que ça pas possible encore. Ou ka moins qu'on monde qui compte développement industrie fig. Moi a dit Mr. Speaker, moi ça fig a fait en la vie moi et que la vie communauté a comme ka été. Et si moi pour dire 1000 fois moi dit c'est fig qui voit nous l'école. Allez kay go maman nous et puis go papa nous, c'est fig qui tient paille là, voltiver qui met galvanise. Et Jodia moi quoi moi une responsabilité pour femme Afrique, pas en constitution seulement, mais tout patron c'est des monde qui planter fig et puis venir ici et puis parler by femme et que les bien femme. Et c'est pas pour vous ouais ça à cause de ça c'est attaque alors. But he took it in bad faith, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's either the minister lacks the enthusiasm, well, not is either. He lacks the enthusiasm and the zest that characterize his previous tenure as minister. And there's no running away from that. As a new minister for agriculture, he had some vibes. There was some impetus. Some might argue about the results, but you could not have questioned that in the previous life as minister, he did bring a more enthusiastic demeanor to the job. But what do we see from the minister responsible for banana cultivation in this country? People are complaining everywhere about the agriculture sector, but it's not for me to speak on agriculture. But everywhere I go, as long as I continue to be the voice of the people of Denrinoff, I can never be silenced, giving expression to the plight of banana farmers. Fig fait moi, fig fait Mabouya Valley, fig fait Denny Rivière. Et tout le temps, là, il y a opportunité de parler about fig, je vais parler about lui, qui est content, qui n'est pas content. And you're telling me about, if only now I know that. It's only now I know that. You know how many banana producing families or families that rely on bananas that have to rely on remittances today? And I'm talking pre-COVID. We all know that the industry may never return to the glory days that we knew. And this is not your fault. World trade regulations changed the industry forever. And it's not your fault. But when we have to ascribe blame, where blame has to be ascribed, Mr. Speaker, allow us to speak. And don't see us as an enemy in the process of governance. There will always be a global demand for bananas. Like I toujours n'y a demand pour moun manger figon la terre. Peut-être, les âges à venir, Mr. Speaker, pour nous garder pour vendre fig nous through OECS Commission. Because, quand nous te connaître, la tenue 4 pays, la Grenade, Dominique, CVC, et puis cette liste qui a produit fig. We know the islands bananas. Et donc, c'est une figue finie net en CVC. Il finit net la Grenade et puis Dominique. Except ici, c'est le seul pays. And we know the islands et puis OECS là, qui a planté fig commercially. Et qu'on a dit, nous pas ça assise. Et puis, servi OECS là comme market, qu'on nous savons vendre fig, nous, Mr. Speaker. Et comme ça, nous savons OECS là, ni an agri-desk or an agriculture unit. There is a trade unit. And I'm saying perhaps the time has come for us to explore the OECS as a potential market for our bananas. Mr. Speaker, I turn my attention to health. The Prime Minister spoke about health on pages 30 and 60 in the budget address circulated to honorable members. Section 4, beyond COVID-19. That is contained on page 60 and on page 30 under the caption Health is Wealth. Again, nothing new. OKEU will be transitioned. St. Jude will be completed. Health Center for Ancillary and Miku. What has happened to the Larisus Health Center? I have concluded, Mr. Speaker, that the Larisus Health Center has been decommissioned by this administration. Let me écouter le Premier ministre parler about healthcare. Il parle de rien neuf. Il parle about health center, neuf il ouvert en Ancillary et puis en Miku. Et moi, Mr. Speaker, et puis dernier budget address avant l'élection, je vais turn about health center Larisus. Si this is your government à point, that you vais manger health center ça. Mais moi, je dis gens à Denrenoff et puis moun qui a servi health center Larisus. That les Labour Party former gouvernement, nous allons manger health center ça ba. So that moun au Lyon, garder dernier vieux Belmont, l'appel Larisus, Despin, qui dit pour aller jic reform pour un docteur. Ou kay vier servir health center là pour même raison qui était bâti. St. Jude is a mess. But they want to give you the impression that the healthcare system in St. Lucia as we speak is impeccable. Mr. Speaker, 48 hours ago, I had to respond to a call where a constituent needed a ride to St. Jude Hospital. And when we got there, Mr. Speaker, in fairness to the healthcare workers, they were able to attend to him almost immediately and in a very professional manner. He needed an X-ray. And we were told that there is no functioning X-ray equipment at the St. Jude Hospital. And that we would have to pay $200 to take him to Soufrière to get an X-ray. Mr. Speaker, you may encounter these things from time to time where machines break down. But at the time that these things are happening, how can you come here and summon the courage to tell us that our healthcare system is okay? Or insinuate that much? They have played politics with the reconstruction of St. Jude Hospital. Today, we should have been occupying a brand new St. Jude Hospital. But that was not a priority for you. And I'm sure the Prime Minister in his quiet moments, Mr. Speaker, has regretted the 3 years where they did not drive a single nail into the walls of St. Jude by way of continuing with the construction project. Not every St. Lucian has the luxury to hire an air ambulance when the situation gets bad. We are representatives of people, and maybe some of us in here, very few, can just call the air ambulance to move loved ones. But what about the people whom we represent in the rural parts, in Choiseul, Soufrière, Babono, Denry North and South, Labri, Deriso. But they want to make us believe that everything is okay. And it pained me, Mr. Speaker. And I still have difficulty reconciling in my mind. How can you allow construction to go on at a time when you are the government in office? Night and day, construction activities are ongoing, preparing a facility for horses. But a hospital that is a few feet away, for 3 years, you will not touch it. But today, you want to pressure contractors and tell them you want it open by a certain date? It's not going to happen so. We should not be celebrating cladding today, Mr. Speaker. We should have had a completed hospital but the government has run out of time. You have run out of time. And St. Jude, Mr. Speaker, from what I've been told by at least 2 professionals who work on the project, is that St. Jude Hospital will not be completed in time for elections. And they're very skeptical that any patient will be able to move into the new facility during the course of 2021. Mr. Speaker, I have to ask a question here today, in keeping with the pronouncements that were made by the Prime Minister with respect to healthcare. Mr. Speaker, on page 60, is the OKEU being privatized? And that is a legitimate question. I have been bombarded with questions and concerns by nurses who tell me that they are under pressure to sign a document where the hospital will be taken over by an entity other than the government of St. Lucia. I must admit, Mr. Speaker, I don't have all the information. But as recent as yesterday, and the voice notes are still in my phone, where nurses are saying that they've been pressured to sign. Are we going to see a privatized OKEU? Is that the preferred modality in an environment where we probably don't have the resources? Let us have a frank discussion. And if privatization is what you want to embrace and you see it as the solution, let us have a frank discussion. Let us have a frank discussion. But it is not fair for parliamentary representatives to be bombarded by questions, Mr. Speaker, from nurses who do not know their fate. Mr. Speaker, still on the healthcare and closer to home, I have in this house before asked for a 24-hour healthcare service for the Dennery Basin. Mr. Speaker, I have asked for there to be a doctor at the Dennery Hospital after midnight. Like me, you live within close proximity of, well, close enough, Mr. Speaker. And if we have an emergency, this is where we will run with our constituents. But at 12 o'clock, at midnight, the doors are closed. And if anybody has an emergency at 12:30 or 1 in the morning, you have to make the decision whether to go to OKEU or you go to St. Jude Hospital. I believe we have trained sufficient doctors in this country to have a doctor on call for the Dennery Hospital overnight, Mr. Speaker. In 2021, I don't think this is beyond us. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister spoke at length, although I expected more, on crime and security, page 63 of the budget address. I waited to hear something about the decriminalization of marijuana. I did not hear anything coming from him. I don't know if he has passed on that responsibility to one of his line ministers, but I was expecting to hear that bold pronouncement yesterday with respect to the legalization or decriminalization of marijuana. Mr. Speaker, on a recent radio program, I was asked my personal views on marijuana. And you know what I responded to the host? Had it been up to me, or if left to me, I will go to the Bodily Correctional Facility, and every individual who's convicted on marijuana charges, not only will I release them, but I will organize transportation to take them to their homes. Budget address that it Mr. Speaker, dino qui plan gouvernement ni pour legalize decriminalize marijuana. But nous pas tenir about ça, Mr. Speaker. Ek me ka di, on a un programme, on la télévision en pays ça. Là yo mande moi qui position moi les marijuana. Moi dit si décision c'est ça moi pour faire. Moi ka aller bordelais. Et puis personne qui la jole except pour marijuana. Si décision c'est ça moi pour faire. Moi ka la yo. Et moi pas juste la yo pour aller la caillou, mais moi ka mettre des marches en place pour machine mener yo la caillou. Mr. Speaker, the fire service still under the security. We had already gotten, Mr. Speaker, a hint from the estimates. With the paltry amount of $200,000 allocated to the fire service, Mr. Speaker, I always knew that in this budget or this financial year, there would not have been much for the fire service. And almost to make up for having been chided during the debate on the estimates for not having sufficient in the budget for the fire service, the Prime Minister gave a very cursory mention to the fire service. What did he say? They have received training and they've also received some ventilators. There are issues with the fire service. There are issues as it relates to promotion. There are issues as it relates to the comfort levels in some of the stations. And we have made that point here before, Mr. Speaker, that when we speak of national security or the protective services, we understand that the police will be needing a lot more resources than the Bodmin Correctional Facility and the fire service. But as I said, we were forewarned with a paltry $200,000 for the fire service. Nothing that the firemen and firewomen of this country could glean out of this budget presentation that would comfort them or give them hope for the future. Mr. Speaker, still on page 63 of the budget address, the Royal St. Lucia Police Force. What is the state of security in this country today? This has been the worst 5 years for crime and security in this country for a very long time. Murders, homicides have reached record proportions. But Mr. Speaker, we have to be very, very careful to not come across and make it seem as if we are celebrating crime. This is dangerous. And I abhor any politician or political organization that tries to piggyback on crime to score points. There's a lot we could have said. Even our supporters tell us that we're too quiet. But there is a danger in trying to score points when you see the crime situation spiraling out of control. And the political interference right before our eyes in the Royal St. Lucia Police Force cannot help the situation. In as much as crime is a soft underbelly that can be exploited if you want to score cheap political points. It's an easy place to attack. But that is not us, Mr. Speaker. We understand that too well. It wasn't us. When there was a spike in the homicide rate leading to the elections of 2016, it wasn't us. We were not the ones who said it was Kenny's fault. And all of us in here can remember the famous quote, Kenny can't, but I will. It was convenient. And today, Mr. Speaker, what are we seeing? Mr. Speaker, I am all for higher education in the Royal St. Lucia Police Force. And we must do everything necessary to encourage the men and women of the Royal St. Lucia Police Force to educate themselves and to reach for higher learning. It is refreshing, Mr. Speaker, to see the number of men and women in the Royal St. Lucia Police Force who have walked the halls of higher learning institutions to attain certificates, diplomas, BScs, MScs, and even PhD. We need to encourage more officers to enroll. But I want to caution that a degree and a piece of paper alone cannot and should never be the overriding criterion for promotion, as necessary as it is. Mr. Speaker, the command side of policing is equally important, if not more important, just because of the nature of the job. There has to be a balance. We must strike a balance. We do not want a police force of paper pushers, in as much as I encourage and I support more men and women of the force to get themselves qualified. We need to stop bypassing the operationally solid officers who keep the peace and fearlessly put themselves, Mr. Speaker, in the firing line for the security of this country. And because they don't have a degree, or because they don't have a diploma, they are not being considered for promotion. The time has come for us to reinstate meritocracy in the promotions process of the Royal St. Lucia Police Force. It's not vehicles they want or concessions on vehicles. Some of them don't want that. They want to be respected. They want to be appreciated for the sacrifices that they make, Mr. Speaker. And the average officer with whom I converse and I interface, Mr. Speaker, says to me that it hurts to see people whom they know, they outperform day after week after month, being politically handpicked for promotion, and they are left to languish. But I'm comforted when I hear some of them tell me, Mr. Speaker, that they will soldier on, because they refuse to be defined by rank, but instead, Mr. Speaker, they will be sold by the quality of work that they produce. Too many of those men, Mr. Speaker, respond to the calls at 2 in the morning when there's a shooting, putting themselves on the line. And because they've not gone to pursue a degree, they've not been considered for promotion. This is dangerous. The presence of law enforcement personnel, Mr. Speaker, will always be a deterrent for crime. But we should never make it seem as if when the crime spirals out of control, it is the police who are responsible. The presence of the law enforcement personnel, as I said, the only police à la côté, Mr. Speaker, ça a de manière empêcher crime. Mais crime c'est pas un bagay qui c'est faute police. Crime is a social construct where you have dysfunctional families, economic hardship. These are the things that breed crime. And this is not the same as me saying that poverty breeds crime, as some persons have attempted to advance in this forum and elsewhere. Mr. Speaker, permit me to turn to sports. And even you would have difficulty finding the page in the budget address where sports was mentioned. Just a passing mention. What he said did not constitute a subheading or anything. All we've heard is facilities, but only 4. Sufra, Miku, Deriso, and Denry. For 3.5 to 4 years, Mr. Speaker, I monitored the playing fields of this country, from Viewfort in the south to Grozile in the north. You should have seen the number of playing fields that were abandoned. And I have the photographs to prove that, Mr. Speaker. But today, as we get closer to the election, the grass is being cut in some areas. Not all. As we speak today, hours after the appropriation bill has been presented, there are playing fields in this country that are in a state of abandonment. Today. Mr. Speaker, those little playgrounds are equally important as the massive facilities that we are looking to develop. And we have said on this side, we are not against the improvement of sporting infrastructure in this country. I know what that can do for the development of a young person. I've benefited from it personally. Sport is a meaningful avenue through which human beings, young people, can realize their full and their true potential. And I can never stand here and be opposed to the development of sporting infrastructure. But I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, whilst we develop and we expand and we establish modern facilities, let us not forget the little playgrounds. That is where a lot of us started, the little playgrounds. Mr. Speaker, after 5 years, Mr. Speaker, after 5 years, Mr. Speaker, what are the achievements in this particular area of national development? In 4.5 years, we were able to build, Mr. Speaker, community pavilions. We refurbished playing fields. We installed lights. We supported elite athletes. We held quarterly meetings with all associations to ensure that we monitored their programming, Mr. Speaker. We sat with national federations. We supported community programs. We refurbished courts. We built courts. We provided equipment to association clubs and individual athletes. We brought back the school sports program that had been dormant for a couple of years. We facilitated travel for national teams and national athletes. And Mr. Speaker, in 2014, the most successful year for St. Lucia in regional and international competition, and it rivaled 1987 when St. Lucia was the champion of everything, and that even prompted an artist to sing a song. Mr. Speaker, we introduced a separate school sports awards. We provided sports scholarships to athletes in this country. And Mr. Speaker, I am proud of the stewardship that I provided to the Ministry of Youth Development and Sports. Today, when I go on YouTube and I see Julian Alfred, Mr. Speaker, winning medals at the international level for St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker, I feel proud. Larry Edward, knocking on the doors of West Indies, having been supported by the Ministry of Sports and the National Lotteries Authority, Mr. Speaker, at Kville, graduated 2 weeks ago. What about Laverne Spencer? When she had been written off, we stayed with Laverne, Mr. Speaker, and that gold medal at the Commonwealth Games will be ours to cherish for many, many years. Mr. Speaker, recently, or 2 weeks ago, St. Lucia had a very unfortunate situation where our football team had to withdraw from the World Cup. Players were hurt, officials were hurt, and we had a very irate public. It is a situation that is regrettable. But I was very disappointed, Mr. Speaker, when from the outset, the government was looking to recuse itself from the situation and absolve itself of blame and say we have nothing to do with this. Mr. Speaker, you as a government have a responsibility to provide oversight for the workings of all federations in your country, and that if any association is finding itself in difficulty and not able to give the sort of representation necessary to our country, for you, Mr. Speaker, to step in for the good of the players and the good of the game, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, permit me, how much time do I have left?
You have 12 minutes. 12 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, permit me to turn to page 61 of the budget address. And I want to speak about land rationalization and housing. Mr. Speaker, housing and land rationalization go hand in hand. And it is a critical component of the national development agenda. We have a situation in this country where it is extremely difficult for young professionals, Mr. Speaker, to acquire land and build homes for themselves at an affordable rate. In my own constituency, we are witnessing a brain drain where the university graduates and young professionals are moving to other parts of the country to get land, to build, and to set up their families. And Mr. Speaker, I'm saying that this is something we must look at very, very seriously. Housing cannot only be big homes and the development of hundreds of acres with what we call sites and services. So you have water, you have electricity, and this is our concept of housing. I am saying the time is right for us to redefine housing development in this country and pay attention to the small plywood structures that exist in all our constituencies, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as we speak in Dennery North, still on the housing, Mr. Speaker, we have two main entities from government presiding over land rationalization in the constituency. You have the PROUD program and you have Invest St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker. Sometime last year, the minister responsible for housing and member for Castries Southeast stood in this honorable house and he said that the people of Olia, who have been under the PROUD program for a very long time now, Mr. Speaker, will be receiving the lands that they've been occupying, to paraphrase, free of charge. And I welcome that development, Mr. Speaker. But 1 mile down the road, Invest St. Lucia, in typical Invest St. Lucia fashion, Mr. Speaker, moves in. Very little or no consultation with the Office of the Parliamentary Representative, or other stakeholder organizations in the community. And they are telling people in some pockets of my community that after the lands have been surveyed, they would have to pay $4.50, $5, etc. for a square foot of land. And I am saying, Mr. Speaker, that I do not support that. There are other communities in this country where people have received lands for $1, for $2, and you're telling me in a post-COVID environment where you have not been able to send the bananas to France, that people in my constituency have to pay $5 and $6, Mr. Speaker, for a square foot of land?
On a point of order, the member is misleading the House.
I don't know.
I made reference to the lands in the Oleon area that is under the Proud project. That is separate and apart from what lands that are owned by Invest St. Lucia, which is a separate entity to what Proud is doing. So if the member is going to make a reference to myself making a statement in the House that people would get the lands free of charge, and then turning around and saying people now have to pay $4.50 for the land, he needs to differentiate, because the point was clear that it is the lands on the Proud in the Oleon area that is being considered for the residents free of charge. Thank you.
Honorable member, it is...
Can I continue?
Yes, but you understand what he's saying, so I don't have to...
Mr. Speaker, the member was obviously distracted by his phone, because I did say that there were two state entities presiding over land rationalization. I said that last year the member stood in this House and he said that the people of Oleon, under the Proud project, would be getting the lands free. But 1 mile down the road, you have another entity, Invest St. Lucia, with no consultation, and people are being told that they will be paying $5. Did I not say that, Mr. Speaker? That is what I said. Mr. Speaker, permit me to move. How much time? Mr. Speaker, page 45 of the budget address. The first of the Prime Minister's pronouncements on energy was LED lighting and savings on electricity bill. Mr. Speaker, I am giving this government a failing grade for its non-performance in the energy and sustainable development subsector. You would have thought that 5 years, Mr. Speaker, after we lost the wind farm in Dennery, the government would be coming here to announce an alternative. The investor, as I would have said previously, Mr. Speaker, came with his own money. We lost the project where 19,000 homes in this country would have benefited from a wind farm. It would have provided employment for people in the Dennery Basin and the entire east coast of St. Lucia. But we lost that project, Mr. Speaker. He spoke about New Zealand. He spoke about geothermal energy, sorry, Mr. Speaker. That's not new, Mr. Speaker. That's not new, Mr. Speaker. Geothermal energy is something that we've spoken about here during the reign of a previous administration.
You have 5 minutes, honorable member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Solar panels and solar energy, that is not new. We were the ones, Mr. Speaker, who pioneered solar energy in this country, and to underscore the value as an alternative to the use of fossil fuels. Mr. Speaker, we must stop paying lip service to renewable energy and alternative forms of energy. Mr. Speaker, the government has run out of time. And as is the case in the average football match, the fourth official has held the substitution board aloft. They wish they had more time. They wish they had worked more diligently, Mr. Speaker. They wish their priorities had been more streamlined. But unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, they have run out of time. The Prime Minister, during his address yesterday, spoke about the urgency of now. And he says that has nothing to do with elections. He has run out of time, Mr. Speaker. And like a nervous manager of a weak team facing relegation, Mr. Speaker, I can well understand why, Mr. Speaker, we've heard the uninspiring address from the Prime Minister. To the people of Dennery North, I say, Mr. Speaker, the 5 years of begging for your health center and for basic amenities are over. Being starved of state resources, Mr. Speaker, will soon from today be a thing of the past. We will keep our focus in Dennery North, Mr. Speaker. We will not allow ourselves to be drawn into any indiscretion at this late political hour. But we will never cower. We will never be silenced. And we will never be the dry bones on the floor of national politics, as was said by His Excellency during the throne speech. Under a member for Castries East and leader of the opposition, Mr. Speaker, the St. Lucia Labour Party will be marching to victory. And his experience and steady hands, coupled with his humility, Mr. Speaker, will make St. Lucia a better place for it. Through you, Mr. Speaker, I want to say to the Prime Minister, through you, that I agree with you, member for Mikud South, Mr. Speaker. I agree with him. Take your time to call the election. Take all the time you want. You can delay or you can advance. That is your prerogative. But the one thing I know that you cannot influence is the outcome. The outcome of the next general election is inevitable. It will be victory for the St. Lucia Labour Party. And as I said, Mr. Speaker, in my preamble, when the votes are counted in Dennery North, it will be a very simple expression of joy, satisfaction, and hope, encapsulated in a very unambiguous tagline, shone again. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is my contribution to the debate on the Appropriation Bill 2021-2022.
Member for Swozell Saltibus.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the Appropriation Bill 2021-2022. Mr. Speaker, as is customary, I would like to give thanks for another day, give thanks for the blessings that has been bestowed upon me, Mr. Speaker. But Mr. Speaker, like a colleague before me, I would also want to send heartfelt condolences to Senator Joachim Henry on the loss of his son. It cannot be easy, Mr. Speaker, to lose your offspring. Mr. Speaker, my heart also goes out to the brothers and sisters of St. Vincent and the Grenadines on what they are currently facing. Mr. Speaker, I have very, very close ties to many people in our sister country. In a previous life, having been part of an indigenous group making yearly visits to the sister island at Easter time and also having been supportive of the SVG Carnival on many occasions, Mr. Speaker. I've also been very close and I've learned a lot from a colleague parliamentarian, Sir Louis Straker, who on many occasions during my past 4 years gave me some very good counseling on parliamentarian life and how to go about serving people, Mr. Speaker. So I really, Mr. Speaker, want to send out blessings to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Mr. Speaker, what's happening in the world right now is a constant reminder that our lives can change overnight or over the next hour, Mr. Speaker. It reminds us, Mr. Speaker, of our mortality. All over the world, Mr. Speaker, we are witnessing various phenomena, all kind of activity. Mr. Speaker, we just have to look at how all of our lives here in St. Lucia and all over the world have been affected by COVID-19. It brings me back to a conversation I had with a sister from Saltibus, Sister Shala, and she was singing the words of Bob Marley to me, Natural Mystic, and she said, "This could be the first trumpet, might as well be the last." And anybody who wants to learn about the trumpets, Mr. Speaker, could go to Revelations 8 to 11 and learn quite more. But Mr. Speaker, we do not know which trumpet is being blown at this time. But we all should focus on cleaning our consciousness and loving our fellow man and removing our various selfish agendas. Mr. Speaker, I want to turn to a contribution that was made by the former leader of the opposition in maybe the last 2 sittings, Mr. Speaker, where he spoke to social issues. He spoke to where we have come as a society. He spoke to moral decay. He spoke to people having short fuses and how quick we are resort to violence, etc. Mr. Speaker, I wish to point out to the member opposite and to all colleagues that a lot of what we are witnesses in our social environment today, a lot of it is propagated by fake news. And I say fake news, Mr. Speaker, because it is recognized that fake news is a menace, not only because it usually is motivated by an intent to deceive and misinform, but also because it may induce people to act on the information. This, Mr. Speaker, can have grave consequences, especially where the penetration of mobile and social media exceeds that of education and awareness. Does that sound familiar, Mr. Speaker? Further, Mr. Speaker, fake news alone is responsible for the untold misery and loss of life. Mr. Speaker, in recent times, most of my colleagues have seen quite a bit of fake news being spread on their Facebook pages, where the pages have been forged, hacked, and perpetrators enticing people with false promises. Mr. Speaker, I say all that because a lot of the fake news that is being perpetrated out there, Mr. Speaker, we need to focus on who the messengers are. Many times, Mr. Speaker, the message is you should focus on the message and not the messenger. But we are currently in an environment, Mr. Speaker, where we need to focus on who the messengers are. What are their motives, Mr. Speaker? What are they seeking to achieve? What is their history? Why are they now perpetrating such false information? And I say that, Mr. Speaker, because for the past almost 5 years, we have witnessed, Mr. Speaker, opposition to every single thing that this government has done in the past 4.5. Every single thing that this government has done, members opposite have opposed, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I will speak to a little later why I believe this is so. But Mr. Speaker, in the interim, I want to turn my attention to the most blessed community of Choiseul Saltibus. And when I speak of blessed, Mr. Speaker, I not only refer to its unmatched beauty and tranquility, but the talent and the charm of the people. Mr. Speaker, anybody who will deny the significant focus and attention given to this community within the past 4 years and 8 months is somebody living in denial, or someone who has been incarcerated. And I say incarcerated, Mr. Speaker, I use that word deliberately, because while some may not be physically at Bordelais, but their mind is, and they need to free their mind, Mr. Speaker, from that mental prison of color. Mr. Speaker, the Jamaicans say that you will get a Jamaican in every corner of the world. Well, Mr. Speaker, you will get Choiseulians all over St. Lucia, particularly in the north, Grosley, Castries, and environments. Guess what, Mr. Speaker? Many of these are now seeking to return home. You know why, Mr. Speaker? They recognize the ongoing progress currently happening in the community of Choiseul Saltibus. Mr. Speaker, I want to turn my attention to land development in the community. Mr. Speaker, do you know that currently there are places in Choiseul that a square foot of land is being sold at US $15 a square foot? Choiseul, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, it is being purchased. Mr. Speaker, spearheaded by Invest St. Lucia, which forms part of my portfolio, we are currently witnessing the biggest land development taking place at Lafargue Choiseul. 114 residential lots at a developmental cost. Mr. Speaker, if you turn your attention, you could appreciate what I'm speaking about. At a development cost of EC $6.5 million. Mr. Speaker, the view and the tranquility, it's astonishing. The potential and economic benefit to the community cannot be overstated. Mr. Speaker, we recognize that very soon the need for our tradesmen, contractors, the support given to the small shops, our landscapers, bus owners, vendors, fishers, farmers, crafters, housekeepers, Mr. Speaker, are all going to be engaged, Mr. Speaker, in what is happening currently in the community of Lafargue. I should also mention, Mr. Speaker, that very soon we will be bringing to Cabinet a memo which will be providing housing incentives for developers who will be building 5 or more houses and other people who want to do various real estate development, Mr. Speaker. So all of that will benefit what is currently happening at Lafargue. Did I mention, Mr. Speaker, that out of that 114 lots that have been developed already, Invest St. Lucia has received 335 applications. Mr. Speaker, in addition, very close to the Lafargue development, the Proud program, we have another 39 lots being developed. I should say 23 lots being developed, Mr. Speaker. 23 lots bordering with the current Invest project, Mr. Speaker. And we also have 16 lots being developed in the community of PI. And in PI, Mr. Speaker, we are actually developing some vacant lots. And I say vacant, Mr. Speaker, because we have at least, Mr. Speaker, 14 other lots which are currently in occupation, Mr. Speaker, where title will be provided at significantly reduced rates, what we call peppercorn rates, Mr. Speaker, based on length of occupation. Mr. Speaker, a commitment that I made to the people of PI was that they would be empowered by obtaining title to the property that they had been occupying for decades. This is a continuation of my promise, Mr. Speaker, as a number of people have already been benefiting from this. Some have taken a little longer, Mr. Speaker, because they have some survey challenges that need to be addressed. The point here, Mr. Speaker, is that many are receiving economic empowerment after languishing for decades. In our next term, Mr. Speaker, I intend to address similar fate of the people of a community in Lafargue called Cedars, affectionately known as Chutig or Tiger's Tail. Mr. Speaker, now that I just mentioned that community, Mr. Speaker, I just want to pause and make an observation and ask a question, because I've heard it in this House before from members. There are pockets and various pockets in communities across the island that has religiously supported the opposition, Mr. Speaker. Religiously, for years upon years upon years. But, Mr. Speaker, I observe that these pockets are some of the worst off communities, Mr. Speaker. No attention is being paid to these communities, Mr. Speaker. And the people are now recognizing the deficit for continuing to support members opposite, Mr. Speaker. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I get the impression that what lifts and makes members opposite is people asking them to pass a dollar or calling them boss man. You see, Mr. Speaker, I will be able to go to all of these communities, Mr. Speaker. I will be welcome in these communities, Mr. Speaker, because you see, what you see, Mr. Speaker, is what you get. Okay? Mr. Speaker, when you see, I put a picture with me sitting on a block, with me, with the fishermen catching fish, with me riding my bicycle, with me dancing country and western. Whatever you see, Mr. Speaker, is me. I'm not parading anything that is not me, Mr. Speaker. I don't do that for politics. I don't pretend that I'm on a farm because of politics, Mr. Speaker. Everything that I do, Mr. Speaker, is something that I've been doing before. Mr. Speaker, you see, Mr. Speaker, and I was just about to say I'll be inviting you to a river very soon. Remember what is here. Mr. Speaker, I represent a community, a people, Mr. Speaker. And I will always remain grounded with the people. I'm reminded, Mr. Speaker, of a quote from Rudyard Kipling, which I think it's very apt that I share, Mr. Speaker. If you can walk with the crowd and keep your virtue, or walk with kings, nor lose the common touch, if neither foe nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you, but none too much, if you can feel the unforgiven minute with 60 seconds worth of distance, run. Yours is the earth and everything that is in it, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son. There's a time and a place for everything, Mr. Speaker. And I always, Mr. Speaker, believe that there's a time and a place for everything and for everyone. And I continue to promise the people that I serve that I will always make myself available, regardless of the position in society. Okay, Mr. Speaker, I will always sit down with the people that I serve. Mr. Speaker, I wish to move to the area of education and the infrastructure in education. First, Mr. Speaker, I want to place on record the support received from the Ministry of Education in recognizing my constituency having the most schools, barring Castries, and for ensuring that we got the annual resources to improve the various plans to ensure our student, teachers, and ancillary staff, Mr. Speaker, are comfortable and that they operate in a safe, secure, and healthy environment. We cannot overemphasize, Mr. Speaker, the disparity in the allocation by this administration in comparison to the last. It's like chalk and cheese, Mr. Speaker. The former administration, Mr. Speaker, wants to take the credit for the new wing of the Choiseul Secondary School, indicating, Mr. Speaker, that they had everything in place to build, but lost the election. Mr. Speaker, this is what I know. But before I go there, Mr. Speaker, I just want to extend best well wishes to the principal, who I know is not too well, and God guidance to the current vice principal holding on the fort, Ms. Laffey. Mr. Speaker, on being launched as a candidate for Choiseul Saltibus, in my maiden address, maybe I can say virgin address, Mr. Speaker, because I was politically naive and untouched. And it's on Facebook, Mr. Speaker. You could always go and look at it. I pointed across to this area where the secondary school was, and I promised very early to address the countless and numerous issues with the faulty block, and that we would construct a new wing. Mr. Speaker, construction started in April 27 and concluded in January 2019. And from the picture here, Mr. Speaker, the ribbon was cut on the 14th of May 2019. We now boast, Mr. Speaker, an advanced state-of-the-art facility, including music room, science lab, 21st century classrooms, disability access, which our children, Mr. Speaker, are now benefiting from. Mr. Speaker, just so you can understand why I'm saying all of this, for your information, in 2010, when this administration was in office, we authorized the consultancy on the construction of this facility. We lost the election, Mr. Speaker, and the members opposite could have made it a priority to commence the demolition of a disaster waiting to happen. 5 years, Mr. Speaker. And it is very important that we let that sink in, Mr. Speaker. Because when they say that they had everything in place to have constructed the school, 5 years, Mr. Speaker. However, months before the election, and Mr. Speaker, just for your information, this facility costs just about $7.8 million. However, Mr. Speaker, they could not have constructed the school within 5 years. But months before the 2016 election, they started construction of a $65 million administrative project in Beaufort, of which $10 million, Mr. Speaker, was just for foundation works. So, Mr. Speaker, I hope you understand when people say that they could have, what that means, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I mentioned the allocation of annual resources earlier. Mr. Speaker, I want to speak to conditions of the various educational facilities in the community, Mr. Speaker. And the word that comes to mind, Mr. Speaker, is horrible. Conditions of washrooms and toilets, Mr. Speaker. And this, Mr. Speaker, is facilities that are being used by our students, our children, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, on my very first visit to every single school in the community, I recognized the urgent need that this was one of the areas we had to address immediately. One particular school, Mr. Speaker, was the Saltibus School. And Mr. Speaker, it was so terrible and so horrible, I could not have waited for the allocation from the Ministry of Education, but I allocated some funds from the Community Development Program to build an entire new toilet block for the Saltibus School, Mr. Speaker. We also completely renovated, Mr. Speaker, toilet blocks at the Delse Primary School, and several other schools, Mr. Speaker, had to have had toilet replaced, tiling redone, roofs and ceiling redone, fencing, electrical. Mr. Speaker, there were schools, Mr. Speaker, when it rained, Mr. Speaker, and the water entered the electrical lines, the lights were going off, Mr. Speaker. Hazardous to our children. Putting people first, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our government also recognized that there was a need to increase school transportation. And we added 4 new buses on the Choiseul Saltibus constituency. And Mr. Speaker, why this is so critical is that many families were making private arrangements to send kids to school and could not settle their monthly bill with the bus drivers, Mr. Speaker. bus owners would come to me to support some of these parents by placing them on the transport program. And Mr. Speaker, the inability to settle these bills, Mr. Speaker, would create embarrassment for kids, create embarrassment for parents, would create friction in communities, Mr. Speaker. And the fallout some parents had, Mr. Speaker, was not sending children to school. Or sometimes the children would go hiking to get to school, those who had that drive, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, it was very important that we increase the transport subsidy. But, Mr. Speaker, it is my understanding, and members opposite can correct me if I'm wrong, that the opposition, when they were in government, Mr. Speaker, had actually stopped the school transport subsidy program. That's unbelievable. Unbelievable, Mr. Speaker. Something so critical. Mr. Speaker, when I heard that, I questioned the priority of a youth economy being at the front of the opposition's conversation, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we also increased the school feeding program, the book bursary, Mr. Speaker, and for the past 4 years, Mr. Speaker, as a representative for Choiseul Saltibus, I have ensured, Mr. Speaker, that at least two young children from the community were able to get scholarship a year to go to seek their university education, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in addition to that, as a parliamentary representative, I have done numerous small contributions and small works in schools, providing shelves, televisions, retrofitting. In fact, Mr. Speaker, thanks to the Sandals Foundation, who retrofitted a music room and provided all the musical instruments to the Reunion Primary School. And as a parliamentary rep, I was responsible for retrofitting the room to accommodate Mr. Speaker. But Mr. Speaker, while these things may be small, I recognize they're important, and I have to say it. Because, Mr. Speaker, if I can do that, and I'm hearing, I can't remember who opposite Mr. Speaker was begging for a sheet of plywood. So, Mr. Speaker, just put that in context, Mr. Speaker. Just put that in context. Mr. Speaker, because of the size of my constituency, it is expected that we would have significant public infrastructure to maintain. And like the schools, Mr. Speaker, we have the most playing fields. The Lafargue playing field is considered central to all. And Mr. Speaker, an unkept election promise by various administrations to provide lighting was delivered by this administration, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank the Minister of Sports, and I want to thank, Mr. Speaker, the Minister, because, Mr. Speaker, the Minister insisted that I should not settle for anything but the best. And so a previous offering was turned down for what is now in place, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, just to show you the hunger and the passion of the young people in Choiseul, immediately after the lights were installed, Mr. Speaker, the community introduced what was known as the Choiseul Smash, which was hailed as a resounding success. And it gave vendors and artisans, Mr. Speaker, an economic opportunity. Spectators came from all over the island, Mr. Speaker, and some of the matches were also viewed online. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, as a result of COVID, a lot of the plans for the field had to be put on hold, but we are taking advantage of the downtime, Mr. Speaker, to grade and level the field and also regrass it, as I indicated in my previous contribution to the House, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to take the opportunity Mr. Speaker, to recognize some people who have continuously given up themselves and to assist us in what was happening at the Lafargue field. Sabina Slafei, better known as Sabi, Mr. Speaker, who powered the lights, Mr. Speaker, in an effort to assist us in reducing the costs. And Mr. Speaker, there are some occasions where we had to pay him and some occasions where he has provided his generators for free. I'm really appreciative of the assistance given by the gentleman, Mr. Speaker. I also want to, Mr. Speaker, recognize the efforts of Francis Josephat, popularly known as Robert, and Claude Vibes Mitchell, Mr. Speaker. These gentlemen, Mr. Speaker, not waiting to get paid, would come and do work on the cricket pitch, cut the grass, Mr. Speaker, and when we are in a position or when we are able to give them some sort of financial assistance, we would. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to place on record my appreciation to people who still have that voluntarism spirit, Mr. Speaker, and come out and don't see the selfish attitude in assisting what we are trying to do in the community, Mr. Speaker. I want to remind Mr. Speaker, to remind constituents and remind, Mr. Speaker, organizers, that as a parliamentary rep, we will create foundations, we will create infrastructure. But as a people, we must work together to put the programs and structures in place. Facilities do not belong to any one party, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I welcome a new youth and sports officer in place who recently came in, and I'm hoping that he will bring his energies, Mr. Speaker, to put some of these programs and structures in place. Mr. Speaker, I look forward to the next term to enclose the Lafag playing field, provide facilities for the players, vendors, and spectators, Mr. Speaker. I look forward, Mr. Speaker, to also placing similar focus on our next major field, which is the PI playing field, Mr. Speaker, very well known, Mr. Speaker, for the excellent grounds for playing cricket as well. Other community fields, Mr. Speaker, Saltibus, Jetwin, Balka, Dibrel, Cafe, Coco, Monjac, and Delse, and in some cases, Mr. Speaker, while they have been used for decades, acquisitions have not been finalized. This we intend, Mr. Speaker, to address. Mr. Speaker, Shozal Saltibus have provided outstanding sports personalities. And Mr. Speaker, in that time, it was based on primarily on raw talent. We believe now with new technology, updated facilities, the sky is the limit and we can only continue to excel. I want to recognize, Mr. Speaker, in the gallery, Maya Tashe, who's also a very keen cricketer and who has been working very closely with the youth and sports activities in the community, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Saltibus Human Resource Center, or Community Center as it's popularly known, is one of the largest in the community. And currently it's in a deplorable state, Mr. Speaker, unfit for purpose. I have received various quotes for the renovations, and I intend, Mr. Speaker, to make it a priority. Fencing of the facility must also be included to secure this investment. Mr. Speaker, the Delse field serves the environs of La Pointe, Industry, Boisden, Ravino, Fonciu, Daemon, but they do not have an avenue to have community meetings and trainings. I have received renderings, Mr. Speaker, and have indicated to the Honorable Prime Minister and Minister of Economic Development of funding requirements in our new term, Mr. Speaker. The Morgouge, Mr. Speaker, has a court facility in a state also of disrepair, and attention will be paid to bring back sporting life to this community. The Jetrin, Mr. Speaker, has a beautiful field, Mr. Speaker, and every time they have fundraisers, they have to build a bamboo structure, Mr. Speaker. We are looking, Mr. Speaker, to put in a facility to stop that recurrent going to look for bamboo to build facilities whenever they have some activity. But, Mr. Speaker, as I said, the building of the facilities is one thing. We don't want them to remain white elephants. And it is very important, Mr. Speaker, that the structures and the programs are put in place. And, Mr. Speaker, I do look forward, as I said, for the energy of the new Youth and Sports Officer to addressing pre-existing deficiencies. Mr. Speaker, I want to turn my attention to healthcare. And that, Mr. Speaker, is a major area of concern. we do have an aging population in the community of Saltibus-Choiseul. And because, Mr. Speaker, most of the people there earn a living by either farming, fishing, construction, craft, laborers, mason, carpenters, many do not have the benefit of a pension or NIC support, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, you know, when I think about it, how the opposition has chided the Prime Minister when he sheds tears, Mr. Speaker. In fact, Mr. Speaker, even me, I have told the Prime Minister that he needs to take a deep breath when he speaks to matters of the heart. But, Mr. Speaker, I come to understand and recognize it's because of his compassion. And it is because of this compassion, Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Prime Minister recognizes the urgency of introducing universal health care to the people of St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, you can say what you want, Mr. Speaker, but every single one of us across the divide are affected, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to health care. And I cannot understand, Mr. Speaker, not even on this issue, which affects all of us, has the opposition said, Mr. PM, we support you. Let us work together on this one. Let us combine forces on this one, Mr. Speaker. This cannot hurt you. This cannot hurt you. A matter that every single St. Lucian, Mr. Speaker, would appreciate, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it may, Mr. Speaker, cost us a bit, those of us who are working, it may cost us a couple more dollars, Mr. Speaker, but the benefits are immeasurable. Mr. Speaker, in my constituency office, Mr. Speaker, I am flooded with requests for medical assistance. I see so many people doing fundraising activities because they cannot meet their medical bills, Mr. Speaker. What is this causing, Mr. Speaker? Depression in households. Mr. Speaker, this government, Mr. Speaker, has spent millions of dollars during the past 4 years, Mr. Speaker, providing medical assistance to people who are unable, and I'm sure the member for Central Castries will maybe be a little more pointed and give us the actual figure a little later. But let's compare figures. Yes, all governments do it. Let's compare the figure. Let's compare the figures. Mr. Speaker, 3 of the community's health centers in my community were retrofitted to be made more resilient centers. 3 of my community centers, namely Montgouge, Saltibus, and Lafargue. Mr. Speaker, I welcome, Mr. Speaker, what is being done to ensure that we have a world-class, and Mr. Speaker, I want to repeat that. I welcome what is being done to ensure we have a world-class hospital, not a Vieux-Fort class, not a St. Lucia class, but a world-class hospital at St. Jude's, Mr. Speaker. Something, Mr. Speaker, that we can be proud of. And, Mr. Speaker, you know, you had a refrain, Mr. Speaker, that, oh, if you're sick, you got to go to Martinique, or you go to Trinidad. We want the reverse here in St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker. We want people to be able to come to our country for medical assistance. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, we want to attract the best. We want to attract the best, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, that's why I keep saying we need to unlock our color minds. Let us emancipate our minds from this color and give Jackie's jacket and let us say what is good, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, unemployment in our community is a leading concern. And it baffles me, Mr. Speaker, why members opposite would not welcome the opportunity this government has created to encourage business processing facilities in the south of the island. I heard the member for Dennery North indicate Imache tomber en les chaises li. That's what he said. Imache tomber en les chaises moi. Lemeton Powell Fig. Well, I almost fell off my chair, Mr. Speaker, when I heard a complete 360 turnaround supporting Ojo Labs today. Mr. Speaker, from the time Ojo Labs was introduced, this government, these members opposite, Mr. Speaker, have been giving us licks left, right, and center on Ojo Labs. And today, but Mr. Speaker, I'm happy because sometimes it takes time to learn. It takes time. Mr. Speaker, you're talking about opportunities that were not present, you know. You know, Mr. Speaker, our government negotiated salary subsidies to train young St. Lucians in a new field, and members opposite have a problem with that. In effect, Mr. Speaker, what the member for Vieux-Fort North, Vieux-Fort South, and Labrie are telling the young people in their communities, do not go to work at this facility because I do not support the government putting money to assist paying your salary. That is what you're saying. You are telling the young people in your community, don't go and work there. Mr. Speaker, currently about 1,000 young people are gainfully employed at these facilities in Vieux-Fort. And we expect a marked increase with another building being made available. Mr. Speaker, under the OECS Regional Tourism Competitive Project, as highlighted in the Prime Minister's address yesterday, funds have been identified to upgrade the Choiseul Arts and Crafts Center. Mr. Speaker, I have been advocating for an overhaul of this facility and how it currently operates. Based on our plans for the redevelopment of the Choiseul waterfront, Mr. Speaker, which includes a jetty with a commitment from the government of Japan, we expect to bring an exciting economic link to the Handicraft Center. We also plan, Mr. Speaker, to inculcate our vocational and skills training within this structure. Mr. Speaker, I mention an exciting economic link because now, with this jetty, our employment opportunities are limitless, from tour opportunities to various natural sites, to witness craft making in action, farm, river, waterfall tours, our world-class 5-star restaurant, which is currently under construction at Delsay, with the Piton looming above you, our recent acquisition of the Monsieur Sugar Mill site, and the plans to create a camping site of international standards to host various events. Mr. Speaker, the excitement of all that is coming to Choiseul is pretty close to orgasmic, pretty close. Sister Sarah would chide me on the use of the word, but Mr. Speaker, we have been in talks with Invest St. Lucia to provide about 20 acres of agricultural land to create a farmer's village, Mr. Speaker. And what we intend to do at that farmer's village, Mr. Speaker, is to provide half-acre lots to young people. And the intention is that no two young people would plant the same crop on their half-acre lot, but it would be rotated when your crop has been sold, it will be rotated, Mr. Speaker. That farming village, Mr. Speaker, is also going to become part of a tour, a touristic tour, because we also plan to have a farmer's market there, Mr. Speaker. And work is in place. There's some legal matters being addressed, Mr. Speaker, but that is one that we're looking forward, Mr. Speaker, to put it in place very soon. We recently installed a 20-gallon tank to complement the existing 120,000 unit in the Delsay area. And this will serve, Mr. Speaker, as a raw water reserve to serve the farmers in the community. And funds, Mr. Speaker, were also made available to replace old pipes and revalving. About $200,000 was made available. And, Mr. Speaker, while there are current problems because some areas the valves have not been put in place, Mr. Speaker, with the technocrats who are involved, we expect this matter to be very speedily resolved. One of the problems, Mr. Speaker, we have in the community is the problem of water supply, Mr. Speaker, a consistent water supply. And, Mr. Speaker, it was as a result of this, Mr. Speaker, very early in my tenure, Mr. Speaker, we recommissioned and rebuilt the Mate pumping station. Mr. Speaker, there's a story with regards to that Mate pumping station, which I will leave for another day, but I will just let you know that some people who claim to love the people of Choiseul, Mr. Speaker, was actually trying to prevent this pumping station from being built because they claim it was on their land, only, Mr. Speaker, to recognize that it was government land, Mr. Speaker. How some people, Mr. Speaker, can claim to love a community, and something that was not taking 2,000 square feet, Mr. Speaker, they were already prepared to take the government to court for constructing a pumping station. Mr. Speaker, through the BNTF, there has been a proposal to obtain a 100,000 gallon tank, Mr. Speaker, to be placed at Victoria, which will complement an aging concrete tank, Mr. Speaker, which continuously leaks, and that could be one of the reasons why we have the problem. That, Mr. Speaker, will serve the communities of Lamaze, Montjac, Montgouge, and I am aware, Mr. Speaker, from conversations with the chairman of WASCO, that they are in early stages of speaking to an investor with regards to a desalinated plant at Ansivoy, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Saltibus is another place, and you would think that Saltibus being in the rainforest would not experience water problems. But on a visit, Mr. Speaker, to the catchment area, we recognize that it has served its useful life, Mr. Speaker. And we went exploring for a new catchment point, Mr. Speaker. And priority will be placed, Mr. Speaker, to ensuring that the people of Saltibus and their water problems are addressed, Mr. Speaker. And that is one of projects, Mr. Speaker, we'll address with some priority, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we currently just completed and maybe still have maybe a few engagements on a project, Mr. Speaker, and while it is what you would consider a small project financially, Mr. Speaker, but I think it's one of the projects that brings me significant joy, Mr. Speaker, and that is we have been able, Mr. Speaker, to purchase some solar panels, Mr. Speaker, to serve households that do not have electricity. Mr. Speaker, and I want, Mr. Speaker, to point out a young gentleman. I call him an inventor, Mr. Speaker, because he also has just gotten a patent for an invention that he has produced, and we'll hear a little more about that in time to come. But a gentleman from the community of Roblo by the name of Marinus Felix, no relation, Mr. Speaker, at least not that I'm aware of. But the gentleman came to me, Mr. Speaker, recognizing the number of people in his community who did not have electricity. And he provided a proposal. And, Mr. Speaker, I indicated to him I would support him, Mr. Speaker. And together with my attaché, Mr. Speaker, who has now gone ahead on his own, Mr. Speaker, to purchase a few of these to also put in place, and I commend him for that, Mr. Speaker. This panel, Mr. Speaker, goes on the house of the individual, and it provides them an avenue where if they have a cell phone, they can charge their cell phone. It also, Mr. Speaker, provides them, the unit that we provide, it also provides them with a solar radio, Mr. Speaker. So, and also a freeway lighting, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, you should recognize the joy, or you should see the joy, Mr. Speaker, emanating from these people after these units have been installed in their homes, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I look to do a lot more of that, and I really appreciate, the gentleman who came to me with the idea, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, since 2017, I have been speaking to the construction of the PI and the Roblo community centers, Mr. Speaker. And the Minister for Economic Development, member for Castries South, would tell you the amount of pressure I have placed on him. Southeast, member for Castries Southeast. The amount of pressure I've placed on him in terms of the length of time these things were taken to come to fruition. And I recognize, Mr. Speaker, that one of the challenges, Mr. Speaker, was that every time various drawings were sent to the World Bank, they were being rejected for one reason or the other. But finally, Mr. Speaker, the drawings were accepted. Tenders have been submitted. Tenders have been opened, Mr. Speaker. And we expect very soon, Mr. Speaker, that the people of the community of Piai and Roblo would get the long-awaited community center, Mr. Speaker. And the people are excited because they already have so many plans, Mr. Speaker. And what this thing does, Mr. Speaker, it reinvigorates the community spirit, Mr. Speaker. People come back together to create theater, to create show, to have these meetings, Mr. Speaker. So the excitement of putting a community center is not just a community center, Mr. Speaker, but what it does for the people who have been without such a facility for many years, Mr. Speaker. I also welcome, Mr. Speaker, the fact that tenders have gone out for the PI Bridge, Mr. Speaker. We would know that the PI Bridge has been a single-lane Bailey Bridge for forever, Mr. Speaker. And the tenders have gone out. The community of PI, Mr. Speaker, is one of the communities with very close African roots, Mr. Speaker, and the authenticity with regards to the drum playing, Mr. Speaker, is very deep. And in consultation with the people of the community, they felt they wanted something that could grab that which they hold very deep, that historical association. And so, Mr. Speaker, the drawings for that bridge would also reflect that sort of African authenticity and reflect the drums, Mr. Speaker, in its construction. Mr. Speaker, I move to roads, Mr. Speaker, and I've always indicated, Mr. Speaker, that the Choiseul community, the village in particular, has one road, Mr. Speaker, which was neglected by the previous administration. And it was one of the very few promises that I made. I don't normally make promises, Mr. Speaker, but I did indicate that this was a road, Mr. Speaker, that we would address, Mr. Speaker, from the cross to the police station, which we have done, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, what I will indicate, Mr. Speaker, that we recognize that there are certain areas in that road where they have some water tables that are very high. And as a result of that, Mr. Speaker, we have spoken to the Minister of Infrastructure because we recognize, Mr. Speaker, that they may have, instead of the asphalt surfacing, we may have some areas we may have to enjoin maybe with a concrete fixture. But the people in the community are very, very proud of the road, Mr. Speaker, and we look to complement that road with what is going to be done on the Choiseul waterfront, Mr. Speaker. A community where you could not drive to, Mr. Speaker, because of the deplorable craters that were in the road was the community of Cocoa, Mr. Speaker. The very first project we did, Mr. Speaker. And, the opposition continuously say, Mr. Speaker, that is election projects, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, every project is an election project. Every single project, whether it was done in 2016 or it was done in 2021, is an election project. Because I work to make the people put me back in office. So, Mr. Speaker, the Cocoa Road, Mr. Speaker, the Cocoa Road is one, Mr. Speaker, that, the people... Re-election project, whatever you want to call it. The Saldibus Road, Mr. Speaker, as I indicated, has been one of the most extensive roads under the OECC project, Mr. Speaker. And it has come with significant challenges, Mr. Speaker, because it is one of the roads, Mr. Speaker, that also has quite a bit of what you'd call retaining structures. Because whenever we have had a hurricane, we've had road failing, we have had, it's an area, Mr. Speaker, it's in the rainforest belts, Mr. Speaker, so there are quite a few precipices, Mr. Speaker. And so it has gone a little bit beyond the time that we expected it to have gone, Mr. Speaker. And, the residents have, begun to demonstrate their unhappiness with the period that is. But I can promise them, Mr. Speaker, that the contractor has promised that he'll be back on that road by next week, Mr. Speaker, and we should see the completion of that road in short order.
Remember, you have 10 minutes in which to complete.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The community of Park Estate, Mr. Speaker, Gayabois, a community, Mr. Speaker, that has continuously, where residents refer to themselves as the forgotten community, Mr. Speaker. We did not forget them, Mr. Speaker. A promise that was made to them that their road would be addressed, Mr. Speaker, is in effect. In fact, the contractor has indicated to me, Mr. Speaker, that the reason he has not started pouring concrete is because the shipment that came in was insufficient, because he's bringing in these jumbo bags, Mr. Speaker, and he does not want to start and stop. So he indicated to me that the balance of the concrete will be here very soon, and we expect to see a concrete road being placed in that community. And Mr. Speaker, if you ever get the opportunity to drive there, I would welcome you to drive. It's a very scenic community, Mr. Speaker. The vegetation is extremely lush, you know, and the people are exceptional, as is synonymous with Choisel's people, Mr. Speaker. Because you've been there. Mr. Speaker, I turn my attention to the Debrel Road, Debrel Motet Lamas Road, Mr. Speaker. As we speak, Mr. Speaker, work is ongoing, Mr. Speaker, and it is a welcome sight to the residents, Mr. Speaker, because, Mr. Speaker, this road, Mr. Speaker, was constructed few months before the election of 2016, Mr. Speaker, and you would not believe, Mr. Speaker, the deplorable state that we have come to experience on this road. It now takes approximately 9 minutes from the Debrel Gap to Lamaz, when you compare that, Mr. Speaker, to about half an hour before. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank, Mr. Speaker, particularly some of the bus drivers who've had to ply that route, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that people get to their homes safely. I speak of people like Mr. Wensley, Mr. Speaker, who has been, you know, a faithful bus driver to the residents of. There are others, Mr. Speaker, one of them being my brother, so I don't want to show any biasness, Mr. Speaker, but there are bus owners, Mr. Speaker, who continuously, you know, take care of the people in the community, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have also constructed a number of CDP projects, Mr. Speaker. CDP projects, Mr. Community Development projects, Mr. Speaker, that have made a difference in people's lives, Mr. Speaker. And only yesterday, the member for Sufra and I was speaking, and, you know, indicated to me that what we're doing, Mr. Speaker, while some people will say roads, is that we are creating oases where there were deserts. Because, Mr. Speaker, with a road, there's going to come significant economic benefit, Mr. Speaker. Because people now are able to, one, go to work and back easily. They can also create their own economic activity in their community, invite, you know, people to come in, Mr. Speaker. So we're very proud of what we're doing. And, Mr. Speaker, as I've indicated, some people, you know, want everything done at the same time. It is a gradual process, Mr. Speaker. Works will be done as we continue. We have now seen the construction of the Foncy Road, Mr. Speaker. The Sose Road has been completed, Mr. Speaker. We've addressed Balka, Mr. Speaker, in terms of significant drainage works, Mr. Speaker. We have touched every single community, Mr. Speaker, in the community of Choisel Saltibus. Mr. Speaker, I want to touch on the issue of cannabis, Mr. Speaker, because recently, and only just before I came in this afternoon, I was asked by the reporters that this government is being accused, Mr. Speaker, of trying to fool the people and want to address the whole cannabis issue just before elections to fool people and that they will not be fooled. Mr. Speaker, I want to place on record, as I have done before, Mr. Speaker, that from day one, I indicated that the issue of cannabis is not a campaign issue. It is not a government, it's not going to be seen as a government issue. That's why I invited the members opposite, and they had the member for Vieux-Fort North to serve on the committee, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, what surprised me, Mr. Speaker, was the member for Denry North. I was out and I just came in and I heard he was saying that if he had his way, he would have gone to Bordelais and take everybody who had been arrested for marijuana, Mr. Speaker, and he would have brought them, driven them to their home. He was part of a cabinet, Mr. Speaker, where the Attorney General said that you would never see the legislation to deal with cannabis over his dead body. Over his dead body. He said it, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm not playing politics with cannabis. I am not playing politics. The time is right, Mr. Speaker. The time is here for cannabis to be addressed. It is being addressed. The AG, the ADRI Chambers is working on it, Mr. Speaker. I know we'll be getting, the draft very soon, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member, you may continue.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I continually hear the refrain from people who refuse to unlock the one-color minds that this government has done nothing. Mr. Speaker, the saying is, if you repeat something over and over again, it becomes believable. But, Mr. Speaker, that strategy should change. Because all it does, Mr. Speaker, is it highlights their mental limitations. Because the evidence is glaring, Mr. Speaker. The evidence of what is being done across St. Lucia is glaring, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government, this is a government, and if you want just a few things that this government has done, very few. This government has reduced VAT by 2.5%, Mr. Speaker. This government has waived property tax for 5 years, Mr. Speaker. This government, Mr. Speaker, has provided debt forgiveness on medical bills for senior citizens, Mr. Speaker. This government has subsidized flour by an additional $5, Mr. Speaker. This government has amended the Fiscal Incentive Act to benefit creative industries, ICT sector, professional services, spa and wellness. This government, Mr. Speaker, has provided, as I said, millions of dollars in medical assistance, Mr. Speaker. This government has provided 2,000 bags of rice, flour, and sugar to cushion the COVID impact when they provided it to NEMO, Mr. Speaker. This government has maintained a cap of $13.95 on gas despite volatility in oil prices, Mr. Speaker. This government, Mr. Speaker, has provided $7.1 million in subsidy on cooking gas, Mr. Speaker. This government has waived corporate tax on interest income earned by banks on loans to small business sector. This government has created an environment, Mr. Speaker, where our manufacturing exports has increased by 12.5% in 1 year, Mr. Speaker. And for the first time, Mr. Speaker, this government has achieved 100% occupancy at our free zone, resulting in the creation of jobs, Mr. Speaker. This government, Mr. Speaker, has pumped $10 million annually in school support, Mr. Speaker. Abo diabo first, Mr. Speaker. By people, like my grandmother would say, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I want to thank the staff of my ministry, in particular, Mr. Speaker, my permanent secretary and the directors. I want to thank, Mr. Speaker, all agencies that fall under my portfolio. The Chamber of Commerce, Small Business Association, the Bakeries Association.
Honourable members, I would like to hear the member from Swaziland.
Manufacturing sector. I also want to thank my constituents, Mr. Speaker, for the confidence they have placed in me and they're pledging, Mr. Speaker, to put me back in office for another 5 years to ensure, Mr. Speaker, our commitment, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my constituents who support my motto that flying starts from the ground and that we must remain grounded to achieve our greatness. Mr. Speaker, in concluding, I wish to quote a senior gentleman from the community of Saltibus, Mr. Lambert Smith. When I came into office after the 2016 election, Mr. Speaker, he told me, and I quote Mr. Speaker, his exact words, cause people will vote for you for 4 reasons. 1, because they are hardcore supporters of the party. 2, they are your family, they are your friends, they are your well-wishers, and they wish you good. 3, because they believe you will give them a contract. And 4, because they are satisfied with what you are doing and what you have done, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, unquote, I may not have been able to give everybody who wanted a contract one, but by my work, Mr. Speaker, I will make up for more than those who may have been upset as a result of that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I look forward to continuing to serve the people of Choiseul Saltibus, Mr. Speaker, and I close, Mr. Speaker, by indicating my full support for the Appropriation Bill 2021-2022. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members, I would just like to remind you, in your support for your colleague, remember that we have to record and the system must hear the member speaking, so just be a little control as to the applause. Member for Soufrière, Foncé.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to record my full support to the 2021-2022 Appropriation Bill under the theme Adapting, Overcoming, and Persevering. We are a resilient nation, as presented by the Honorable Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, and member for Micoud South. Through you, Mr. Speaker, I wish to thank the Prime Minister for adopting widespread resilience strategies geared towards overcoming economic challenges and persevering to achieve resilience and prosperity for this great nation of ours. At this time, Mr. Speaker, please allow me to extend my thoughts and prayers to the government and people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines as they face the challenges of the volcanic eruptions occurring for the past days. This ordeal is sentimental to me, Mr. Speaker, as the constituency I serve is also in a volcanic zone. Mr. Speaker, when our government took its first measures in March 2020 in reaction to the breakout of COVID-19 on our country, no one expected over a year later that we would still be faced with the overwhelming effects of this virus. Mr. Speaker, we offer condolences to the family and friends of persons who have succumbed due to COVID-19, and we extend our speedy recovery to the patients in care at our hospitals and quarantine centers. Mr. Speaker, I encourage our citizens, especially my constituents of Soufrière Font Saint-Jacques, to be vaccinated to provide protection against this deadly virus. Mr. Speaker, we are all aware of the challenges that the island face and the impacts of COVID-19 on our economy. And I applaud the Prime Minister and my cabinet colleagues for the strategic response and interventions to the COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. Speaker, this budget is being presented on the eve of an election as required by the Constitution. This election, Mr. Speaker, will be the most important of our lifetime, especially as we continue to grapple with the unprecedented health and economic fallout from COVID-19. Mr. Speaker, my government symbolizes and promotes substantive people-centric representation. This administration has protracted this country on a path of resilience, growth, and recovery. We are led by a competent leader with a strategic vision which practices fiscal prudence with the future of this country in mind. And so, Mr. Speaker, we are not afraid of the future. time and time has proven that a united Workers' Party administration is best to deal with the catastrophes of this country, Mr. Speaker. And the records are there to show that. Whether it be, Mr. Speaker, natural disasters or the man-made economic and social calamities caused by the members opposite, United Workers' Party always rises to the occasion. Mr. Speaker, it's important that we do not repeat the mistakes of the past. And Mr. Speaker, permit me to take you back to what we inherited in 2016, which was not in the so distant past. Mr. Speaker, we found an economy in depression after 3 years of recession. No private sector confidence in the economy. No confidence from international financial organizations. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, they were sent to put their fiscal house in order. We found, Mr. Speaker, unemployment of over 24% and youth unemployment at 44%. We found, Mr. Speaker, a dilapidated network throughout the length, infrastructure network throughout the length and breadth of this country, Mr. Speaker. A demoralized police force. We found a country with no DPP. Forensic lab closed, Mr. Speaker. School plans in dilapidated conditions, not conducive to learning, Mr. Speaker. We found healthcare at its lowest in 2016. We found, Mr. Speaker, an incomplete St. Jude's Hospital. We also came into office where there was only a naming ceremony for OKEU, and the doors of the hospital remained closed and shuttered thereafter, Mr. Speaker. These, Mr. Speaker, were only some of the man-made disasters created by the members opposite. In contrast, Mr. Speaker, this UWP administration have kept its promises from day one when we entered government. Within 100 days in office, we delivered on 5 to stay alive. When they doubted, Mr. Speaker, that we could reduce VAT, we did so from 15% to 12.5%, and within 18 months, Mr. Speaker, the same amount of money they collected at 15%, we were able to collect it, Mr. Speaker. This government, Mr. Speaker, curbed the sharp rise of unemployment under the SLP and reversed the course to 16% pre-COVID, Mr. Speaker. And even today, in the midst of a pandemic, it is lower than what we found in 2016, Mr. Speaker, at 21%. We have created, Mr. Speaker, thousands of jobs in the IT sector, Mr. Speaker. During a pandemic, Mr. Speaker, many jobs were created through the infrastructural development program which this government is currently undertaking. For the past 4 years, Mr. Speaker, this UWP administration have achieved an economic growth yield of almost 11%, 2011 to 2015, just about 1.1% average by the Labour Party. We, the workers, Mr. Speaker, have placed great emphasis on our health sector with the operationalization of the OKEU hospital. We, Mr. Speaker, are building a new St. Jude's Hospital. World class, Mr. Speaker. We have converted Victoria Hospital to a respiratory hospital for COVID-19 patients. We are undertaking, Mr. Speaker, major upgrade to community health and wellness centers throughout the length and breadth of this country. Mr. Speaker, we are restoring the dilapidated infrastructure we inherited from members on the opposite side. We are undertaking the largest road rehabilitation in the history of this country. We have devoted substantially to education and education infrastructure, Mr. Speaker. We are repairing our school plans. We have invested heavily in high-structured national sports infrastructure program for our youth and our sportsmen and women, Mr. Speaker. We have increased social assistance to the poor and our vulnerable groups. We are upgrading our Hiwanara International Airport to be a world-class airport to meet the challenges of the future. We have recorded pre-COVID, Mr. Speaker, record numbers in tourist arrivals. We have better equipped the police force, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, like I said earlier, we are on an eve of election, of a general election. And we have seen every election cycle, Mr. Speaker, the members opposite appear with a jingle. In 2011, it was jobs, jobs, jobs. Now, in 2011, it is putting you first. Mr. Speaker, I need to ask them whether they put the people first when they had a 16-to-1 mandate, because that surely could not be a better opportunity. Did they put the children of this country first, Mr. Speaker, when they allowed the school plan to depreciate and only spend $1 million a year on school infrastructure, Mr. Speaker? Did they put the people first, Mr. Speaker, when investors were written to and advised against investing in this country, Mr. Speaker? Did they put the minibus drivers, the taxi drivers, the commuters first when they allowed our road network to become this deplorable, Mr. Speaker? Did they put the people first, Mr. Speaker, at a time when there was no financial crisis, there was no drought, no hurricanes, there was no epidemic, and for sure, there was no COVID-19 pandemic when they took this country down to the doldrums, Mr. Speaker? Did they put the people first, Mr. Speaker, when they implemented VAT at a rate of 15% on their backs, the oppressive tax that they call it, Mr. Speaker? Did they put the people first, Mr. Speaker, when they put the 66% increase on water bills, Mr. Speaker? Did they put the people first, Mr. Speaker, when they placed the burden of avoidable debt from the countless cost overruns which they run, Mr. Speaker? Did they put the people first, Mr. Speaker, when they increased vehicle license fees? Mr. Speaker, in this election, every voter must make the right choice. That choice, Mr. Speaker, has never been clearer than ever before. This election, Mr. Speaker, is a decision as to whether you keep this country on the path of prosperity or return it to the dark days of the St. Lucia Labour Party. This election, Mr. Speaker, is a verdict as to whether we will allow a desperate opposition under the member for Castries East to take this country to the wilderness of fiscal infertility and economic turmoil, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, the political measurement for us all in this room, in this honorable chamber, Mr. Speaker, is to make measurable progress in reasonable time for our people. Obviously, Mr. Speaker, the members opposite, especially the member from Castries East, has not understood this expectation after 25 years in this honorable house. Measurable progress, Mr. Speaker. Measurable progress in a reasonable time for our people. Mr. Speaker, if you haven't improved the quality of life of the people you represent after 25 years, what do you think will happen when you are responsible for a population of almost 180,000 under your watch, Mr. Speaker?
Honorable members.
If, Mr. Speaker, you have not been able to take care of your own household, How can you convince the rest of St. Lucia?
Honorable.
You can take care of 16 other households, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member. Honorable member.
Okay.
Leader of the opposition. Leader of the opposition. Leader of the opposition. Leader of the opposition. Honorable members, I will have to ask every one of you to work out. The standing order provides that when the speaker is speaking, that the chamber is supposed to be silent. Let me remind honorable members that for the purposes of Hansard, we need to hear the honorable member from Soufrière. Unsaltable, sorry, honorable member.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for your protection.
Francis Jacques, you see, confusing today. Soufrière Francis Jacques, continue, honorable member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, it is very clear that the member for Caste Resist have given up. He admitted in this honorable house, he has not even written the exam yet, Mr. Speaker, but he has admitted that he is going to fail. He admitted that he is unable to raise money, Mr. Speaker, if he gets into office. So that, Mr. Speaker, should tell the people of St. Lucia what to expect from the members opposite, Mr. Speaker. My good people of St. Lucia, do not let the skepticism and fear tactics of the opposition make you believe otherwise. What we are hearing is the same old political rhetoric which lack motivation and inspiration, Mr. Speaker. I am confident, Mr. Speaker, that the people of this country will not fall for their propaganda, their lies, and misinformation. They are doing what they do best, Mr. Speaker, opposing because they cannot govern. Mr. Speaker, what we have on the opposite side of this honorable house are a group of men who have been intoxicated by the vapor of political power, Mr. Speaker. Nothing else, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want the good people of this country to know that we are working for you under the leadership of a compassionate Prime Minister and a group of caring men and women on this side of the honorable house, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, leaderships are tested during crisis. We have a leader who is decisive and adaptable. Our Prime Minister is the master for the situation at hand, Mr. Speaker. This administration, Mr. Speaker, didn't bury its head in the ground and expect the challenges to balloon away. No, we faced the challenges head-on and grasped on the opportunities presented. Mr. Speaker, there is a clear and defining difference in the leadership between this government and those opposite. With no world crisis, Mr. Speaker, no pandemic, the members opposite management of this country in 2011, 2016 was disastrous, and the records are there to show it, Mr. Speaker. Well, you have to ask yourself, Mr. Speaker, where would St. Lucia be today if they were in office during these difficult times we are faced with? Mr. Speaker, we have the right captain to steer the ship. This country has the right leader at the right time. He is the prosperity deliverer, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I shall now move to matters pertaining to my constituency. Mr. Speaker, effective and people-centered representation is umpired by statistics and stories. We will get to the statistics, but before I do, Mr. Speaker, I seek your attention in sharing a true story with you and this honorable chamber. Mr. Speaker, in 1997, a very beautiful, ambitious young lady met a gentleman who came from Canada, and she fell in love with him, Mr. Speaker. He being a doctor, she thought he could have advanced her ambition. After 9 years, Mr. Speaker, she realized he was a fraud because his doctorate was false. She was very hurt by his deceit, Mr. Speaker, and one of the false doctor's henchmen believed that he could console her well enough, and therefore she fell in love with that henchman, Mr. Speaker. She spent another 10 years, Mr. Speaker, with him, but he too failed miserably, worse than the false doctor himself. In 2016, Mr. Speaker, she decided to move on and give someone else a chance from the other side to see what would happen. Someone away from what she knew for the past 20 years. Someone with a different love, Mr. Speaker. A genuine love, a compassionate love, Mr. Speaker. To this date, Mr. Speaker, she is satisfied. She is there smiling, growing, and progressing substantially, Mr. Speaker. She said she is staying with this man. In her own words, Mr. Speaker, she said, he is not another one, he is the one. This young lady, Mr. Speaker, is no other than the crown jewel of St. Lucia, Soufrière Fonce-Jacques. Mr. Speaker, a politician's interest is to create change. When I presented myself to serve the people of Soufrière Fonce-Jacques, I formulated my vision, which is to empower the people through sound socio-economic policies and human resource development programs to become financially independent and economically sustainable. The vision for my people, Mr. Speaker, fortifies me daily to work harder for its realization. And from the onset, I had a developmental plan for the constituency which was underachieving and underperforming due to the uncaring and vision-impaired representatives of the St. Lucia Labour Party. Mr. Speaker, I am now seeking your indulgence to share with this Parliament, this honorable chamber, a PowerPoint presentation on how we have taken Soufrière from a barren desert to an oasis for the past 5 years. And will also show our transformative agenda for 2021 to 2026. When performance is measured, performance improves, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I turn your attention to the Hummingbird Beach project, a project, Mr. Speaker, which was conceived in 2010 by the United Workers' Party, started in 2011, and as a result of the defeat in the 2011 elections in November 2011, the project came to a total stop, Mr. Speaker. It was a promise I made to the people of Soufrière Fonce-Jacques that upon my election, this project would have been completed. And Mr. Speaker, I am very happy that under a United Workers' Party government with the support of the members on this side of the House, we were able to deliver the Hummingbird Beach project. And Mr. Speaker, the same member for Castries East, leader of the opposition in 2012, he came on the site. He left, and in 2016, not one brick was laid at the site. So I need him, Mr. Speaker. I need him and the Labour Party to come to Soufriere, come to Hummingbird Beach Park. Look at the people at the beach park. Look at Miss Fidelis. Look at Beverly. Look at Anselm, the boys at Mystic Man Bridge in the eyes, and tell them that when you spend 5 years in office, you put them first and did not build the Hummingbird Beach Park. Look them in the eyes and tell them you'll put them first. Mr. Speaker, we continue, and Mr. Speaker, permit me to thank the Taiwanese government for the generosity in granting us the monies for this project, as well as the Soufriere Regional Development Foundation, which contributed over $1.3 million to the Hummingbird Beach Park project. Mr. Speaker, we move on to Sulphur Springs Park, where an additional 3 pools were constructed, Mr. Speaker. Again, the place had only 1 pool, which was creating a lot of congestion for visitors, and we saw the need to construct an additional 3 pools to increase the revenue, create more job opportunities, and more opportunities for the Soufriere Foundation to help with the development of Soufriere. Mr. Speaker, we move on to the Old Trafford complex, a complex where, Mr. Speaker, we have now established a farmers market. As we know, Mr. Speaker, the farmers and vendors of Soufriere on a Saturday and weekday, they used to be on the sidewalks selling their produce, whether it rained, whether sunshine, wind, whatever it is, Mr. Speaker. And after 20 years of Labour's neglect, United Workers' Party was able to build a world-class farmers market for the farmers and vendors of Soufriere Font Saint-Jacques, Mr. Speaker. And we have vendors like Mr. Charlemagne from Moka, we have Noelita, Miss Elta from Belfont, Clara, and also Ras Iron, and many, many other vendors whom every day are extremely pleased and happy about this intervention by the United Workers' Party, Mr. Speaker. We also have the bus terminal, Mr. Speaker, which we constructed on the Old Trafford complex, and all the drivers on the Soufriere Font Saint-Jacques, Soufriere Vieux-Fort, Soufriere Castries routes are extremely pleased, extremely satisfied with what we have produced there for them, what we have constructed there for them, Mr. Speaker. And again, I would like to thank the Minister for Economic Development and the Taiwanese government and people for this contribution, as this was built with funds from the CDP program, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we move on, and we have the rebirth of Soufriere Carnival, Mr. Speaker. Upon assuming office, Mr. Speaker, we created the Soufriere Events Committee, a committee which was created to revamp and revitalize cultural activities and bring back the enjoyment of this art form to the community. And in 3 years' time, Mr. Speaker, pre-COVID, we were able to have maybe the second best carnival in St. Lucia after the National Carnival in Castries. So I look forward to, Mr. Speaker, for post-COVID, for us to have a very big and grand carnival again in Soufriere. And again, Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the Soufriere Regional Development Foundation as the main sponsor of this event every year for the past 3 years. Mr. Speaker, we move on to the Soufriere Square redesign, Mr. Speaker. As you know, Mr. Speaker, this was a project we inherited when we came into office, but it was so badly designed and the work was so faulty, Mr. Speaker, we had to put it on hold, review, redesign, and today, Mr. Speaker, we have a world-class square in Soufriere, a square which every community in St. Lucia can model after, Mr. Speaker. And I would like to thank the member for Mikud South and the Minister of Finance, Mr. Speaker, for making the resources available for this project to be completed. Mr. Speaker, we move on to the Soufriere Police Station rehabilitation works. Of course, Mr. Speaker, as you know, we inherited a rundown police station full with a number of issues and complications, and we're able to do a comprehensive rehabilitative work on the police station. And the policemen in Soufriere Font Saint-Jacques are extremely pleased, extremely happy, proud to be housed in this facility, Mr. Speaker. Again, this facility was rehabilitated by funds from the Soufriere Regional Development Foundation, and I would like to thank them immensely for that level of support in the development of the constituency. Mr. Speaker, we also conducted rehabilitation works on the Soufrière Fire Station to make it a more conducive area, a more conducive building for the fire officers there. And again, this was done with assistance from the Minister for National Security. So I want to thank him for his consideration, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we move on to the Soufrière Hospital, where we all know that the hospital experienced 2 fires within a month in 2017, and we were able to do substantial repair works to the hospital to get it back to normalcy, get it operational again. We were able to get equipment into the hospital. We were able to get X-ray machine. We were able to have a fully functional laboratory, dentistry, etc. at the Soufrière Hospital, Mr. Speaker, to provide the necessary medical services to the people of Soufrière-Fort-Saint-Jacques, and by extension, the many visitors who come to the shores of Soufrière on a daily basis, and those who, of course, stay at the many hotels and accommodation places in the constituency. Again, Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the Honorable Minister of Health for her support, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, school refurbishments. The school plans, Mr. Speaker, throughout the constituency was in deteriorated state and was not conducive for learning. And we were able, Mr. Speaker, to do work on every single school in the constituency, Mr. Speaker. New roof was installed at the Soufrière Infant and Soufrière Primary Schools, Mr. Speaker. Renovation was done at the District Education Office. The Soufrière Primary School washroom was restored. We demolished a defective annex at the Soufrière Primary School, which was caused by Hurricane Thomas since 2010, Mr. Speaker. The Leseta Combined School, in collaboration with Ladera Resort, Mr. Speaker, we were able to build a new annex at Leseta with 4 classrooms, a music room for the students of Leseta Combined School. And I would like to thank Ladera Resort, the owners, managers, and staff of Ladera Resort immensely for this wonderful contribution, Mr. Speaker, of this new annex at Leseta Combined School. Fort-Saint-Jacques Primary School, Mr. Speaker, we were able to refurbish the computer room there. This is a computer room which was highly infested by termites, mold, and so on. And of course, through the school rehab program, every summer, we were able to do substantive works at the Fort-Saint-Jacques Primary School. And for all these works, Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the member for Micoud North and the Minister for Education for giving favorable consideration to Soufrière Fort-Saint-Jacques every single year for the past 5 years, Mr. Speaker. Works was also done at the Bouton Combined School, the Soufrière Comprehensive School, Mr. Speaker, and we look forward in the new term of office of governance, Mr. Speaker, to build a new block at the Soufrière Comprehensive School under the PUTS program, the EQUIP program, Mr. Speaker. We move on to sports infrastructure, Mr. Speaker, and we have the Soufrière Mini Stadium, Mr. Speaker. Soufrière Mini Stadium, Mr. Speaker, we have converted this into a world-class sporting facility, Mr. Speaker. We have completed a FIFA-regulated size playing field with synthetic turf, Mr. Speaker. It is the same turf that we have, Mr. Speaker, at the Mabuya Valley. The same turf that many on the opposite side, Mr. Speaker, tells you that it is cancerous. But when they initiated it during the term of office between 2011 and 2016 at Mabuya Valley, the one at Mabuya Valley was not cancerous. But the one in Soufrière is now cancerous, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it was initiated under your watch. Mr. Speaker, also at Soufrière Mini Stadium, we have installed the installation of an IAAF 400-meter 8-lane synthetic track, Mr. Speaker. We have also installed the lights, and currently they are working on the wiring of the lights, Mr. Speaker. So within the next few days, within the next 2 weeks or so, the lights should be coming on at the Mini Stadium, Mr. Speaker. Rehabilitation of the Fort-Saint-Jacques playing field, Mr. Speaker. After 20 years of support, of loyalty to the St. Lucia Labour Party, Mr. Speaker, they never ever touched the Fontaine Jacques playing field. It had to take the United Workers' Party to come into office and create this in Fontaine Jacques, Mr. Speaker. And just about a week ago, Mr. Speaker, we installed lights on the Fontaine Jacques playing field, and we are hoping that within days those lights will come on, Mr. Speaker, and we'll able to regrow the grass, fertilize it, and so on, so that the field could be in a pristine condition for the young players of Fontaine Jacques to enjoy, Mr. Speaker, at nights right now, Mr. Speaker. That's grass. Washroom facilities, Mr. Speaker, will also be constructed below the court in Fontaine Jacques for the young men and women who participate in sports, both on the court and on the playing field, Mr. Speaker. Ruby Cricket Ground, Mr. Speaker, since we have the artificial turf on the track at the Soufrière Mini Stadium, we do not want to disadvantage the other areas, which is cricket, another main area. So we have acquired 8.01 acres of land at Ruby, where we are in the process of excavating, leveling, to create a new cricket ground at Ruby for the cricketers of Soufrière Fontaine Jacques, Mr. Speaker. So going into the new term, Mr. Speaker, we are going to be placing lights, grandstand, and other amenities on that ground to make it a first-class cricket facility in Soufrière, especially for the west coast of the island. Mr. Speaker, the Soufrière basketball court. We did extensive refurbishment of the Soufrière basketball court with collaboration from Anshasne Jade Mountain, the Soufrière Regional Development Foundation, and of course the Basketball Association of Soufrière, Mr. Speaker. And in the coming term, we are going to continue doing additional works on the Soufrière basketball court, Mr. Speaker. So therefore, Mr. Speaker, at this point in time, I would like to thank the member for Dennery South for his interventions in Soufrière, and to let this Honorable House and St. Lucia know that this is the best Minister of Sports we've ever had in this country, member from Dennery South. And the people of Soufrière Fontaine Jacques look forward to continue working with his ministry in many other interventions in the new term, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we move on to Palmist, another wonderful community in Soufrière, wonderful people, and we were able to convert an old laundry facility which had been closed for many, many years, I think over a decade, into a learning center. And this learning center, Mr. Speaker, was created for the residents to access computer-based technology and provide basic computer training to enhance skill sets of the young people and other residents in Palmis. It will also be a location, Mr. Speaker, for after-school programs for students and for training to enable residents in becoming more competitive applicants within the job market. So this is a project which I am very, very proud of, and I know that the people of Palmis are extremely happy with this learning center, Mr. Speaker, and we are awaiting the computers and the other equipment and furniture to put in the center so we can have an official opening of this learning center in Palmis, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, several works was done for access and drainage. We constructed many, many footpaths and bridges, drains, to improve access throughout the length and breadth of the constituency, Mr. Speaker. In Fontaine Jacques, in T-Book, in Mini, in Zeno, Ravinclair, Belfont, all over the constituency, Mr. Speaker, we're able to create access and drainage. Mr. Speaker, we also constructed some retaining walls to mitigate against the effects of climate change and to alleviate flooding in certain communities, certain areas of the constituency. We are also, Mr. Speaker, we also constructed feeder roads for our farmers to increase productivity and crop quality. And this will, of course, continue in the next term, Mr. Speaker. And these are feeder roads in Boisden. This is a feeder road which passes next to Mr. Rupert, going down to where Mr. Alain have his land into Font Belfont, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have commenced rehabilitation of our bus shelters in the constituency. and the Lizetta bus shelter was in a deplorable condition. It needed urgent repair because students, teachers, and parents were complaining for a while and were able to get funding from the Ministry of Infrastructure to build this quality bus shelter at Lizetta. Mr. Speaker, we will also be constructing a similar bus shelter in Bouton, where we have acquired approximately 1,500 square feet of land just at the Kachime-Bouton junction, Mr. Speaker, where we'll be placing a similar bus shelter for the wonderful people of Bouton, Mr. Speaker, in the coming days and weeks. Mr. Speaker, we had a landslide at Abasso Edmund Forest Trail, Mr. Speaker, near Mr. Edison's home. And this landslide, Mr. Speaker, came down since 2010 during Hurricane Thomas. And again, they talk about loving the people, they talk about putting the people first, Mr. Speaker, but the people of Font Saint-Jacques were neglected, they were forgotten for almost 10 years until we came into office, Mr. Speaker, and we were able to get this landslide cleared, and now the road is fully open to the Abasso waterfall trail, to Edmonds Forest Reserve, Mr. Speaker, and the many farmers who abandoned their farms in this particular area, where you have very, very fertile land, they are back on the land and producing food in Font Saint-Jacques. As you know, Font Saint-Jacques is the breadbasket of the island, where you have lots of dashing, lots of other root crops, vegetables, and fruits, Mr. Speaker. And we are very, very proud with this project. Again, Mr. Speaker, this is a project which was funded by the Soufrière Foundation to clear this landslide for the wonderful people of Font Saint-Jacques, especially the farmers, the tour guides, the young persons, the young people in Font Saint-Jacques who are going to be traversing this road on a daily basis, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I now move on to road rehabilitation. Mr. Speaker, we now will touch on the new development roads. Those roads, Mr. Speaker, were never given attention by the members opposite for the past 20 years. This development, private development, came into being about 40 years ago. And not a single piece of road was ever reconstructed after 20 years of representation, Mr. Speaker. And they talk about putting the people first. So the people at New Development was never first on the agenda, Mr. Speaker. The only person who was first, the only persons who were first was the St. Lucia Labour Party. And I'm very proud, Mr. Speaker, the work is ongoing. Many parts of the community, we have already poured concrete, new drains, new sidewalks. I have approached the Ministry of Infrastructure, and I will have further dialogue with the member from Castries North for us to put some speed bumps on some of those roads, because the drivers are now speeding on those roads, and we need to protect residents and especially the children who are also playing on those roads on a daily basis. So this is a project I am very, very proud of, Mr. Speaker. The residents are very proud, Mr. Fati, the Samuels, Mr. Regis, Miss Meme, Mistress Ale, those residents, Miss Jenny, Miss Irene, they are extremely proud of the works happening on the New Development Road. And I look forward to the completion of the New Development Roads in a few weeks' time, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we move on to the Esperance Road. And again, Mr. Speaker, the people of Esperance were victimized by the members opposite for decades because of the political affiliation to the United Workers' Party. It was a promise which we made to them in 2011, Mr. Speaker, but unfortunately, we were not returned to office. They came in for 5 years, and nothing was done on the Esperance Diamond Road. I'm extremely proud, extremely happy, Mr. Speaker, that we have started the total reconstruction of the Esperance Diamond Road from the Boaden Junction, Mr. Speaker, from the Boaden Junction all the way to Diamond. And the entire road is now cleared, Mr. Speaker. We have laid the pumice on the road. Any vehicle, any car, any racing car could drive down that road all the way to Diamond into Soufrière, Mr. Speaker. And this is a road, Mr. Speaker, whenever you're down there, I'll be very happy to take you a drive on the Esperance Diamond Road. So I look forward, Mr. Speaker, in the next couple of days for us to start the drainage culvert works where many residents of Esperance, Moka, Boaden, Central Font-Saint-Jacques, St. Philip, Ravinclair, Mini will be engaged as subcontractors on this road. And in the next couple of months, the people of Font-Saint-Jacques will be extremely proud and happy after 20 years of supporting the Labour Party that it had to take a representative of the United Workers' Party to deliver a world-class concrete road all the way from Esperance, Baden Junction to Diamond, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, this road is very, very important, Mr. Speaker, because this road basically opens up the constituency of Soufrière, Font-Saint-Jacques, Mr. Speaker. The road on the other side for Ravinclair, Mr. Speaker, many places that road has been undermined, and sometimes during the rainy hurricane season, you have major slides, and that the road is sometimes blocked for a couple of hours or even days. But with this new road at Esperance Diamond, Mr. Speaker, vehicles will be able to traverse through Esperance, through Diamond into Esperance, into Font-Saint-Jacques, and vice versa, Mr. Speaker. This is also an opportunity, Mr. Speaker, for later on, for the Esperance area to be developed. We're looking at in the new term, Mr. Speaker, to establish a new housing scheme in this area where we are going to purchase lots in this area and put sub-developments where the young people of Font-Saint-Jacques, the young people of Soufrière will be able to purchase their own lots, own a piece of St. Lucia, a piece of Font-Saint-Jacques, and build their homes in this area. This is also an area, Mr. Speaker, with the construction of this new road, we are going to be able to speak with the Ministry of Tourism so that we can have village tourism incorporated in this area of Esperance Diamond in terms of ecotourism lodges, accommodation areas, and so on. So this road, Mr. Speaker, creates a lot of opportunities for the people of Soufrière, Font-Saint-Jacques, for the people of Esperance, Diamond, Moka, Boaden, etc., with the completion of the Esperance Diamond Road. And this is a project that we, on this side of the House, we are very, very proud of, Mr. Speaker. And I know residents in the area, Ms. Marcella is going to be very proud, Mr. George, Tatum, Aaron, Camilla, and all the people, Foubin and Mr. Ensley, and all the people in the Font-Saint-Jacques area who uses this road, who live on this road program, and all of them will be extremely happy with the completion of this road, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we further move on to Belfort, where we have started construction on the Belfort Road, and that is the old French road from Belfort going down to Hermitage. This again, Mr. Speaker, is going to open up this part of the constituency from Hermitage into Belfort, into Boaden, into Font-Saint-Jacques, into Esperance, or from Belfort into Myers Bridge to the south of the island, Mr. Speaker. And this is a road, Mr. Speaker, in speaking with residents of the community, Mr. Speaker, the last time that anything was done on this old French road, Mr. Speaker, was in the 1960s. And this road has been in deplorable condition, totally cut off. Residents like Miss Moulin, Maze Elta, Joan Didier, Mr. Lester John, who lives there, are extremely happy because at the moment, vehicles are able to traverse on this road all the way down into Hermitage, into Sulphur Springs, into Rabot, back onto the main road to Soufrière, to the south, and so on, Mr. Speaker. So this is a wonderful project which is creating opportunities, not only in employment for the people of Belfort, Sulphur Springs, and the surrounding areas, but what it brings to the people living in this area, Mr. Speaker. Finally, they're able to access their homes, they are able to access their lands, and so on, Mr. Speaker. So again, this is a project we are very proud of, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there is another road that is going to be built at Belfort again, and this one is the Belfort-Boaden Road. And again, we look forward for the construction of this road, which is going to be passing right next to Mr. Jerry, Mr. Onan, Bernard, Miss Iris, and other residents in this area. Kulin, and I know they are very happy and they're looking forward to the construction of this road. Again, opening up Belfort into Boaden, Mr. Speaker, creating opportunities for people. So all the development which has taken place in Soufrière, Mr. Speaker, you could see it is people-centric development, Mr. Speaker. we do things to empower people, to build capacity, to create opportunities for people, Mr. Speaker, to change the lives of people, Mr. Speaker. Another road, Mr. Speaker, which is going to be commencing very, very shortly, within a few days, is the Zeno Road, Mr. Speaker. And the Zeno Road is in bad condition. We usually do potholing off and on, but we are very happy that finally the Zeno Road will be constructed all the way from Leicester at the top down to the bus shelter on the main road, Mr. Speaker. And the residents are extremely proud. They cannot wait for the construction of this road. And Mr. Speaker, at this point in time, I would like to thank the Honorable Member for Castries North and Minister of Infrastructure for his interventions and his support, and also the Minister of Finance for his support in ensuring that those 4 roads, critical roads in Soufrière, were part of the National Road Reconstruction Program and will benefit my people of Soufrière Font Saint-Jacques tremendously when completed, Mr. Speaker. So thank you very much, honorable members. Mr. Speaker, we now move on to the Village Tourism Program. And under this program, Mr. Speaker, we are expanding the outreach with the implementation of the Palmis Road Vending Facility, Mr. Speaker. Again, this is a facility which is going to create opportunities for the young people of Soufrière, Mr. Speaker. Young people who are now going to become entrepreneurs and own and establish their own small business in this area. This is a wonderful area, Mr. Speaker. Lots of potential, lots of opportunities, and this government is about putting the infrastructure in place so that the young people of Palmis, Fontbernier, New Development, Soufrière, and surroundings could harness their potential and become new entrepreneurs, create sustainable employment, and contribute to the economic development of Soufrière and in St. Lucia by extension, Mr. Speaker. So I'm very proud of this project, and I'm looking forward to the completion of it. We've started our preliminary works, Mr. Speaker, site preparation and so on, and very soon the contractors will be on site to start construction of the booths, the buildings that you see on the rendering, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we move on to the Soufrière Waterfront Enhancement Project. This is part of the whole waterfront redevelopment project, Mr. Speaker, and we have basically completed the construction of the Shoreline Cafe right on the Soufrière waterfront opposite Bank of St. Lucia, the post office, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I would like to commend 3 young men who approached me with this idea. They had their concept, they did the drawings, and they were given an opportunity to rehabilitate this old gazebo and build this new platform over the sea, Mr. Speaker, into a cafe, Mr. Speaker. So I'm very proud of them, Mr. Speaker, because my representation, the representation of the United Workers' Party, is to create opportunities for all. And when young people come forward with an idea, we quickly harness the idea, put things in place, and encourage them to move on and create something for themselves. And I'm very happy that they were able to put this in place, Mr. Speaker, and I look forward for them to have their official opening and for the visitors and locals in Soufrière, Mr. Speaker. When you come to Soufrière and honorable members, you are able to come onto this deck, this platform, Mr. Speaker, and have a coffee, have a tea, have a sandwich or something right there on the Soufrière waterfront, Mr. Speaker. And again, Mr. Speaker, in the new term, we are going to be building at least 2 more of those cafes, those cafeterias on the Soufrière waterfront to continue the enhancement of the waterfront, but also part of our village tourism program in Soufrière for Saint-Jacques, Mr. Speaker. We move on, Mr. Speaker, to advancing basic needs. Mr. Speaker, access to basic amenities is a fundamental human need for both the physical and social need of our people. And Mr. Speaker, we are improving our water storage capacity to ensure a more consistent supply of water for the residents of Belfort and Boisden. These are 2 communities, Mr. Speaker, for decades have suffered from water problems. Yes, we have the water in Fort Saint-Jacques, but over the years, Mr. Speaker, the amount of water that we used to get out of Fort Saint-Jacques have been getting very, very low. It's a lot less now. And therefore, certain communities are suffering from water, from the amount of water in the pipes. Even my colleague minister from Choiseul, the water which he spoke about at Victoria, the tank, that water comes from Font Saint-Jacques. So what we were able to do, Mr. Speaker, we were able to acquire lands and just about 2,000-3,000 square feet of land in each area in Boisden and in Belfort, where we build those platforms. Those platforms, this current platform you see there, Mr. Speaker, this is going to be able to have 2 5,000-gallon tanks. Wasco is going to be ordering another 4 tanks, where we're going to be putting an additional 2 in each location. So those areas, Mr. Speaker, will have 20,000 gallons of water to be able to serve the people in those small communities of Belfort and Boisden. And I'm very proud of this project, Mr. Speaker. The people have been clamoring for it for a very long time, and this we were able to deliver to Belfort and Boisden, Mr. Speaker. Again,
Honourable Member, you have 10 minutes in which to conclude.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the residents of Boisden, Chateaubriand, and Bouton now have access to internet and cable TV, and we are very proud of that. The young people, the children, they are now able to do their homeworks, their homework online and so on. So we're very proud of that. We are also working, Mr. Speaker, assiduously to deliver water supply for the residents and business places at Colombet. This is a very nice area, very attractive. Residents have been clamoring for water there for a long time. I know Mr. Charlemagne at the Beacon, Crystals, and those other places will be extremely happy when we're able to get the water to Colombet coming from Katchime. Human empowerment, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on the screen now are a few images depicting community and social relations, harnessing our talents, being our brother's keeper, and fulfilling our equity gaps. We can see the donations of school uniforms, Mr. Speaker, to parents, school supplies, tablets, hampers, sporting gears to our residents, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our vision is holistic and long-term. And in 2021-2026, we have a plan. 2021 to 2026. I will now share our projected plans for the continued development and transformation of the constituency, Mr. Speaker. These are very critical infrastructural interventions which are needed, Mr. Speaker, but there will be added smaller programs and so on to help with the transformation of the constituency. We have the Soufrière Administrative Building, which I spoke about 2 or 3 years ago, but due to financial constraints, Mr. Speaker, and of course, combined with COVID now, we were unable to deliver this administrative building, but we look forward under a bold agreement to get this administrative building built in Soufrière, in the area where we have the old town hall. This building is unsafe, it is unfit to be used for any purpose, and it is going to be demolished, and we're going to put a new administrative building there, Mr. Speaker, and the plan is to have all government offices housed in this one building where the people of Soufrière, Font Saint-Jacques, and by extension, Canneries and Choiseul could access government services in one area in Soufrière, Mr. Speaker. And I'm talking about passports, birth certificates, ID cards, licenses, and all the other services which currently exist in the town, Mr. Speaker. The Old Trafford Development Phase 2, of course, Mr. Speaker, will be something that we are going to be undertaking in our new term in office under the Village Tourism Program, Mr. Speaker, and there will be additional concession booths on Old Trafford where you are going to have many young persons going into entrepreneurship. We have the fitness pack, Mr. Speaker. This is a pack which we said we were going to be doing this term, but again, through financial constraints, and of course COVID hitting our shores, we were unable to deliver on this pack. But we have the equipment out on island already, Mr. Speaker. We have the outdoor gym equipment and so on island already. It's just a matter of getting the other parts of the pack in place and have the official opening of the fitness park in Soufrière at new development, Mr. Speaker. We also have the Fombenier Park, Mr. Speaker. This is a park which is in dilapidated condition. We will be doing under the CDP program this quarter in the financial year. We'll be doing some rehabilitative works to the park, but this is what we envision the Fombeni Park to look like in the new term, Mr. Speaker, when we get into office. Palmist housing, Mr. Speaker, again, beautiful community, which I love immensely, Mr. Speaker. Housing is an issue there, and we look forward to have a new housing complex, housing scheme taking place there, where you have the old Blackstone houses, where we are going to engage the Ministry of Economic Development through the DVRP or some EU funds to start this project in Palmis. And let me say, Mr. Speaker, this is not a short-term project. This is medium to long-term, Mr. Speaker, because of the number of persons who live in the community and the complexities you have in this area, Mr. Speaker. New Development Park, Mr. Speaker, we are going to, again, construct this park at New Development. This is the park which is next to Mr. Fauché, opposite Gemma and David. This is a beautiful recreational park, Mr. Speaker, and we look forward to some form of funding through CDP or some other grant funding to be able to build this beautiful recreational park at New Development from the wonderful people of New Development to complement the new roads which we are just building in this area, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there are some additional initiatives which we are looking to undertake in the new term. Of course, we are hoping to start the Torai vending platform this quarter, going into the new term. The new Sufra Hospital, again, this is going to be done through a bolt agreement. We are very, very far in negotiations, in concept and so on for that new hospital. We have already acquired the land, 3.01 acres of land, to place this new Sufra Hospital. We are looking at the public library is in very, very bad condition, Mr. Speaker, and what we're looking at doing, Mr. Speaker, is breaking it down completely, put up a new building where we're going to have the library, we're going to combine the public library and the ICT center, which is at the mini stadium, into one building, one location, Mr. Speaker. We're also looking at, Mr. Speaker, in the Fombeni area, opposite Mr. Boswell Lamontagne, to build a community cultural and theater arts center. As you know, Mr. Speaker, the town hall building was the building used for most, in fact, all community activities, events, shows, etc. And for almost 20 years, it's been out of commission, and therefore we need a world-class, state-of-the-art facility in Soufrière where we're able to have cultural, community, and theatrical events at this location, Mr. Speaker. Barons Drive, Mr. Speaker, we have a beautiful plan, Mr. Speaker, for the Barons Drive waterfront redevelopment on those stones, Mr. Speaker, starting from the end of Barons Drive, where Aquenius have his little bar, going all the way up to the old fish market, Mr. Speaker, where we're going to be building a world-class boardwalk with areas for different shops, different bars, different restaurants, different cafes, and so on, for the people of Barons Drive, Mr. Speaker. And in the weeks and days ahead, I will be sharing with them the concept design, the ideas for this Barons Drive waterfront redevelopment, Mr. Speaker, to empower the people of Barons Drive, Mr. Speaker. It's a beautiful community, very nice people, full of potential, and I look forward in the new term to building this on the waterfront at Barons Drive, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I look forward to constructing some additional agricultural feeder roads, which I did promise for the new term, but again, COVID came, the monies we had for agricultural feeder roads had to be repurposed into COVID relief. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I look forward to the roads, the agricultural feeder roads of Dago, Zaminot, and also from Mini to Dewash in the new term. Of course, Mr. Speaker, back to the mini stadium, we look forward to the construction of the 8-lane, 25-meter Olympic-sized swimming pool, the aquatic pools, and a multi-purpose court for netball and most probably volleyball and lawn tennis in that area of the mini stadium, the field area, Mr. Speaker. And of course, Mr. Speaker, we will soon be constructing a field, a small playing field at Fonjalib for the wonderful people of Fonjalib, Mr. Speaker. But this is this is a facility which may go on into the new term. So I'm very proud of that, and they'll be extremely happy to have the new playing field in Fonjalib. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank Almighty God for the blessings of goodness and strength that He has bestowed upon me in my pursuit of excellence for the people of Soufrière Font Saint-Jacques and by extension St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, I thank my family for their unrelenting love and support throughout the years in my daily service to this country. I would like to express gratitude to my friends, my campaign team, supporters and well-wishers for caring and supporting me wholeheartedly to ensure that we deliver on our promises and commitment to the people of Soufrière Font Saint-Jacques. Mr. Speaker, I thank in a distinct way my valued people of Soufrière Font Saint-Jacques. I am in the corridor of this assembly because of the confidence they have placed in me. I want them to know that my service to them have no boundary or period of expiration. Whether it was on the night of June the 6th, 2016, or today, my desire and aspiration for them and the constituency will never wane. I am their servant and will serve as the conduit in the compartments of government to ensure a better, fulfilled life for them and generations to come. I look forward in serving the interest in this honorable house for a very, very long time. Mr. Speaker, I express my gratitude to the wider diaspora for the words of encouragement that I receive daily. I thank them greatly for their concern and well-being of the constituents of Soufrière Font Saint-Jacques. I thank immensely, Mr. Speaker, my cabinet colleagues for their guidance to me. I also express gratitude on behalf of the people of Soufrière Font Saint-Jacques for the collaboration in their respective designations. Your contributions have made a significant difference in the lives of the people of Soufrière Font Saint-Jacques. Mr. Speaker, I also take this opportunity, this time, to really thank the Honorable Prime Minister for his partnership and considerations to my constituency, for the many times that Soufrière was the pilot for project implementation. This will forever be appreciated by myself and the wonderful people of Sulphur City. Mr. Speaker, I thank immensely the Department of Physical Planning, my Permanent Secretary, Deputy Permanent Secretary, my Ministerial Secretary, the Architectural Department, and all heads of sections and staff, and also to my Cluster Minister, the member for Babono. Mr. Speaker, I thank in a special way the Soufrière policemen, fire officers and staff at our medical facilities, staff in the office of the parliamentary representative, my office, the mayor, councillors and staff of the Constituency Council, the directors and management and staff of the Soufrière Foundation, the management and staff of the Soufrière Marine Management Association, Soufrière Events Committee, the DO office and the principals of all the schools in Soufrière Font Saint-Jacques. Mr. Speaker, also all the religious denominations, the Youth and Sports Council, Business Community, SLHTA, and many other groups in the Soufrière Font Saint-Jacques community, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I thank you and honorable members for your indulgence. And Mr. Speaker, I consciously support this 2021-2022 appropriation bill. Thank you very much.
Honorable members, it is my intention tonight to have two more speakers, one opposition, one government. But we shall take a break now, and then it could be we can return at 7 or any time or 1:45. That is fine with me. We're taking a break now, and then two more speakers, and that's the end of the day.
Speaker, I beg that we adjourn the House until 7:10.
7, that's fine.
7 o'clock.
Honorable members, the question is that the House do stand suspended until 7. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion say aye. As many as of contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. House is suspended.
suggesting the suspension there of the Parliament as the Speaker of the House makes his way out of the chamber. A short break before debate on the appropriation bill continues. We have seen the presentation just gone by the Honorable Eric Stanislas, the member for Soufrière Forces-Jacques, and of course serving in the Ministry of Agriculture with the responsibility for physical planning. Before him, we heard from Honorable Sean Edward, who is the member for Dennery North, and Honorable Sean Edward is the one who began the debates, with the leader of the opposition deferring until later during the debate sessions in order for him to provide his response to the appropriation bill. A bit of departure there from the convention, but nonetheless Honorable Sean Edward of Dennery North represented, or as he indicated, led the charge for the opposite side. Take a short break right now. Stay with us. We'll be back with more coverage of debates on the Appropriation Bill 2021-2022.